What's up? Welcome back to the State of the Arc podcast. My name is Mike.
My name is Kason.
Today is our final episode of the Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice analysis.
The final episode.
Yeah.
The last one.
The last one out of 2. Next week, we are going to be starting with Vagrant Story.
Yeah.
A lot of people excited for that. I did not expect that one to win the vote, but it did. I was expecting either Nier Automata or Xenosaga to win. And Nier Automata was close. It was neck and neck a little bit, but Xenosaga did not get a lot of votes. I was kind of surprised by that.
Yeah, that was surprising, yeah.
So Vagrant Story is the winner. I will put in the pinned comment where to play up to for the first episode of Vagrant Story. So go check the pinned comment and that will tell you where to play up to. So that's that. That's what we're going to be doing for next week, so look forward to that. But today we're finishing up Hellblade. Yeah. So we just left off after fighting Valravan and Surt and breaking the seal on the door that leads to the bridge into Helheim. So now that she can cross that bridge, you open the door. So there's a flashback here to her village when she returned from the wilds. So she was out in the wilds for a long time.
Oh, yes.
And that's when she met Druth and everything like that, right? She comes back to the village, and it had been basically raided and destroyed.
Yeah.
And this is probably the hardest hitting scene in the game. It's like a very uncomfortable scene to watch. It's really difficult and heartbreaking and terrifying and awful and depressing, but so important, like really key to understanding where she's at and how she got to this like journey that she decided to go on, right?
Yep.
So she comes back into the village and she finds her beloved Dillion has been sacrificed to the Viking gods in what's called the Blood Eagle, which is like this really brutal form of torture and execution where like the back of the skin is flayed and sort of like peeled out so that it almost looks like the skin makes like wings as the person hangs there, right?
Yeah, and kind of between like a slingshot kind of thing, and they're in the middle of it.
Right. So,
yeah, it's pretty bad.
It's really, really bad. Now, there's a couple things I want to talk about here, but the way that the game reveals things is so out of order, like, and so non-linear, that I decided to do is I just put a spoiler warning at the beginning of the first episode saying, look, just play the whole game before you watch this, because it's like impossible to like really explain it without jumping around. Yeah. So Dillion at this point was like the village chief because his father had died. The whole reason that she goes out into the wilds in the first place is because a plague had come into the village.
And she thought it was her fault.
Yes, which killed Dillion's father.
Yes.
And in a moment of grief, he had sort of like blamed her for it a little bit.
Yeah.
And it was like the first time that he had come out of character in that sense and like not been supportive of her.
Yeah.
And anyways, that's why she decided she had to go purge her curse in the wilderness.
Right.
And so Dillion had taken over as the chieftain. And so as the chief of the village, it looks like he was the one chosen as the sacrifice for the Blood Eagle. Mm-hmm. And she comes in and sees that and just, I mean, how awful would that be, right? She just breaks psychologically.
So remember when she went out into the wilds, right? She thought that her issue was causing everybody pain, and she had brought about this plague, this sickness, right? And when she comes back, everyone's dead.
Yeah.
So she already thought it was her fault, but she thought she had done some work. She met somebody to help her work through some of her issues. Mm-hmm. She comes back, and if the plague was her fault, whatever this is is doubly her fault. It's extra her fault. Because
Yes.
what if she had been there?
Yeah.
She clearly has some weapons training or other, right?
Yeah,
You know?
she trained with Dillian actually.
Okay, yeah.
It mentions that she watched him for a really long time as he would like sword practice, do his fencing practice or whatever.
Yeah.
And she like would copy his moves. And so when he meets her and she's doing that, she's like, "Who taught you how to fight like that?" And she's like, "No one."
Nobody.
And he's like, "What do you mean nobody?" "Well, I was watching you do it. You were able to learn that just from watching
Right,
me?"
yeah. So
That's
she's kind of a
crazy.
prodigy of sorts,
Yeah.
right? Which is true of a lot of people with mental illness. There's some extra part of their brain that they're able to access in some weird way, but it comes at a great cost, right?
Yeah.
But she really blames herself for this. So not only is everyone dead, like it would have been different if it was more or less from a plague, but because it was in this manner, that made it even worse. It reinforced that it was her fault. Also, she wasn't there, and she maybe could have done something about it. And then the last thing is that she never actually saw who did this, right? She never saw the Vikings.
Right.
She only saw the aftermath. And so when we go and we're fighting these bird-headed like warriors and these like undead army-looking people, that's her imagination determining. She's reliving what she feels like would have happened if she was there, maybe in one way or another, but she's fighting the people who she thinks are the bad guys in many different respects. And it's her imagination that's conjuring up what they look like.
Right.
All she's seen is what they did. She has no idea what they actually look like.
Right.
And so what she's fighting, it's like, wow, this is what her mind has determined. This is what somebody who is capable of doing that looks like.
Yes.
And it's creepy.
Yeah, and in conjunction with that, the stories of the Northmen from Druth. It's
Yes,
like
and the stories, yeah.
those two things she's using to sort
Yeah,
of like
to fill the
give
gaps.
her context
Yeah,
as to
yeah.
what the Northmen are, right? And what their gods are like. But before she actually goes up there and sees him, she's hearing this, it's like a really deep, aggressive voice. And you come to learn later on that this is like the voice of her father embodied in the darkness, or at least her
Oh, that
idea
really
of him.
deep voice?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that like
that's-
just constantly sort
yeah.
of like talks down to her and is condescending.
So it's less memories and it's more, oh, if he were here, this is what he would be saying.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, he's saying things like, "I will never let you go. You can't get rid of me. I'm your shadow." Now, that's
Yeah.
important because we've talked about that in
Yeah.
Xenogears and things like that, right?
Yeah, Carl
Facing
Jung's.
the shadow. That's exactly what she has to do
Yes.
during the course of this
And
story.
that's what she is doing.
Yes.
In this whole story is her battling the demons in her shadow.
Yes.
And trying to defeat herself, essentially, to be born anew as a new person, you know?
Right. So this voice that is, it sounds like her father,
Yeah.
right? This is the voice of her shadow speaking to
you
her.
go.
It's not actually him. It's her idea of him, but that is actually herself. She is battling herself, but her shadow form
Yeah.
takes that sort of voice, right? "I'll be watching when you draw your last dying gasp in this waking nightmare where all dreams come true." And then it's really poetic. It kind of turns into a poem that he's stating as she's like walking up the hill towards where Dillian is hanging.
Yeah.
And she's starting to realize what she's seeing. "You searched for control, a way to pull through. When you were in love, you left him in tears to smother your furies and banish your fears."
So this is so, it's so funny when you hear it spoken not in that voice.
Yes.
It's like she's clearly talking to herself.
Yes.
This is clearly her rationalizing or explaining how it's her own fault to herself. But in the game, it feels like it's somebody else, you know?
Yeah. "But in the darkness they came, through stormy black seas they raided these shores. Do you still hear his screams? Now that you're home, he's so far away, they've taken his soul. To these gods you cannot pray. They can break you, but not your promise. Even death won't keep you apart. Through this darkness you will find him, in your sword still beats a heart. You fought for love, and spoilt by your darkness within, you fought for your dream. Now there is no way to win. In the head of his corpse lies the seat of his soul, so you must carry his vessel to bring him back home." And that's when she, kind of falls to her hands and knees, and she's screaming, and just the trauma of it is so. I mean, that performance from Jürgen is unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's so passionate and haunted and destroyed. It like brings tears to my eyes like every time I watch it. It's just so powerful.
Yeah,
Like you can feel the pain so deeply from her and that performance. It's so dramatic and convincing. It's just unbelievable.
And then the fact that this is kind of explaining to her what she's doing, like you have to go take his head and go resurrect his soul.
Right.
And why is that? Because it's your fault.
Yes.
Right. And so this is her ultimate taking responsibility for what happened is what she's doing here. That's what's led her to this point.
Yep.
And it's because she feels responsible.
Yep. Now, if you remember from the beginning of the game, there was a line that says something to the effect that it was since the trauma, right, that all of these voices started following her like this. Oh
yeah, when she was like, what, late teens maybe or something?
Well, since this trauma.
Oh, since this one.
It's
so
like
not,
really
not the,
ramped
mother
up.
trauma.
No.
I see.
Since this happened. See, oh, how rude of me. I never told you of the others. You hear them too, right? Mm-hmm. They've been around ever since the tragedy. Well, that's not quite true. Some are old, some are new, but they've changed. They've changed.
Okay.
Right? I think the darkness changed them just like it changed her. So this moment, it's like some of these voices have been with her whole life. But a lot, it's like they've ramped up the intensity of what she's seeing and like hallucinating is really like sharply increased after this event. This traumatic event has like really kicked her symptoms up to like another level. And, we've kind of already sort of like speculated a little bit as to why that is, but it's like she doesn't want to accept this horrific loss. Mm-hmm. And so she right away believes I can take his head into hell and bring his soul back. In order for that to be true, I have to create a hell to go to.
Sure.
And like, again, this is all subconscious. She's not consciously doing this.
Yeah, that's what makes this whole game
so
so interesting.
Her inability to accept that, which is an absolutely human thing, like denial being like the first part of the Kubler-Ross, the stages of grief, right?
Yeah.
That process that she's going through, in conjunction with her already like difficulty with connecting to objective reality because of her symptoms of psychosis, is like just the perfect storm for this journey to like become real in her mind, right?
Yeah.
And it basically was triggered in large part because of this. Not just because, it was horrible and traumatic, but because she doesn't want to accept what she's seeing as real.
Yeah.
So this is basically what kicks the whole thing off, and why she ended up coming to where we're at when we actually start the game, right? Okay, so the voice comes back. The darkness touched you. Everyone could see it in the hollows of your eyes, a gaze averted from life. You ran from it, but brought it nearer, right? That was going into the wilds, right?
Yeah.
Led it to him, an endless suffering worse than death. And you wanted to surrender, abandon him to find peace with the gods? No, the darkness won't allow it. So you will walk into the lair of the beast, look it in the eye, and you will go to war. This is your mission. This is your quest. There is nothing else left.
Yeah.
Freaking crazy.
So there is the note that I took here about the fire as she was escaping the fires, everything around her.
Yeah.
She's more or less imagining what it would have been like were she there and the fires are all around her, right? But she's the one that lights the fires, that starts everything. Mm-hmm. There's a symbolism there, right?
Yeah.
So the village is burning and it's her fault. She's the one that starts the fire, and then it all goes and she has to escape it, right? But each time that's how it goes.
Yeah. Okay, so then, I took this note because when she sees her mother, this is, I think, before you go back through the gate to hell, after you defeat like the second of the two bosses,
Okay.
right? She'll see a vision of her mother in the rock wall. And her mother said, "Oh, Senua, your father does not hate me. He just fears the souls in the underworld. He cannot see that they are already afraid. But I am their healer, and I must answer their cries for help, even if it displeases him." So we're getting some like foreshadowing and setup to the complex relationship that she had, or her mother and father had, and to what ended up happening. Because again, we've already put the spoiler warning on this, right? But her father is the one who killed her mother, burned her, like tied her to a stake and burned her alive.
Yeah.
But Senua had forgotten that. So she sort of thought, oh, mother just like died, she got sick or something like that. She wasn't allowed to see her.
Did her
things
mother
like that.
say something like, forget this moment or something? Or because she was telling her not to look. She said, don't look.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I can't remember
She
if
was
she
really
said
young too.
something like,
she was probably 5 years old or
close
something
your
like
mind
that.
and
yeah.
don't remember this moment. I can't remember if that's true or not. Yeah, she was like 5.
So anyways, it's the seeds of this are starting to be planted here. Oh, your father doesn't hate me.
Yeah.
Right? Like he just is afraid of the things that I can see.
She's in contact with the demons of the underworld.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's a shaman who's, totally against that, right?
Yeah.
Sees
And
it as a
I
curse.
brought up some of the incongruencies, possible incongruencies there last episode about a culture that accepts shamanism but then doesn't want someone talking to the dead. Anyways, there may be an issue there, but it may not be the case with the Picts in particular.
Sure. Okay, so now we're crossing the bridge. You fight some dudes along the way, and there's a little bit of some puzzles that you do. You kind of come to this place that looks like it's, you can see the ocean there, right? Like the water, and it's kind of raining. Mm-hmm. And you start to learn about Hela at this point. The runes start to tell the story of Hela a little bit. Hela possesses large dwelling places in Helheim. Tall are her walls, high are her gates. The name of her dish is hunger, her knife is famine. On her threshold all will stumble. Her bed is called sickbed, and her bed hangings are called flames of a funeral pyre. They say she is easy to recognize, half black and half color of flesh, and her face menacing and grim. So you actually come to this other bridge where she sees Hela for the first time. And this is
massive,
terrifying.
Giant. Oh, it's very, very scary.
Terrifying imagery here. Because it's kind of misty. And then like you just see this giant head kind of coming out like it's crawling across the bridge.
Yeah, and it's like crawling towards
and she's
you.
afraid to look at it. She's kind of turned away like this. She's like looking over here, but she hears it, right? And she's sort of reaching for her sword. And this is where she hears the shadow, the voice of the shadow, right? What are you doing? You're showing weakness. You're not a warrior, you're a disgrace. The gods will punish you for this. Pick up your sword. Pick up the sword, pick it up. Fight it. Get up and fight. And it's at that point that she turns.
She turns to fight, but she clearly doesn't have the resolve.
Yeah.
Right? And there's something about this game that is, she's fighting herself.
Yes.
If she doesn't believe in herself, she loses.
Yes.
Like, that's all there is to it.
Yes.
Right? So the real issue here is her own resolve, her own idea. And they mentioned something before about promise, like your own promise. This is what is going to like make you last, right? And so as soon as she thinks she can't do it, she's right. And that's what she comes up against here. And she's still got a lot of work to do in herself before she can get the resolve to think she could ever compete with Hela.
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty
and
cool.
so, but like even earlier, right, Druth during the fire trials was like, you cannot, what was the exact quote? I don't remember exactly what the quote was, but you cannot resolve the pain or the problem without, if you refuse to look at it, It was all about
sure.
it was all about refusing to look.
That sounds, yeah.
And in this scene, she's kind of, again, not looking at Hela, right? She's not ready to actually look at the real problem going on here in the whole game. And it's not really until the very, very end that all kind of comes together. But she's still not there yet. She's still not able to look at what the real problem is. So she's like you said, she's not there yet. She's got some more work to do.
She's got lots more work to do, and she learns it very painfully after this. So the monster shows up and just like wrecks the bridge, or well, I guess we try to fight, but it's like we just get owned. We end up finding ourselves at the bottom, the very bottom, which is symbolic, right? So she falls down to the pit of darkness and caves and water, right? And she's at the lowest point. This is the lowest point here. And is this where she finds the mirror? Is that? Yeah,
so she has this gash wound on her face, right? And her sword's been broken too.
Yes, her sword is completely broken.
So her sword is broken. She's got this wound on her face. It's a bit of a belly of the whale kind of moment, right?
Yes.
She's got the broken hilt kind of in the fire that she's got right here. She's going to cauterize this wound with that, heated steel.
Yeah.
But as that's going on, right, as she's heating it, and she's looking at herself in the mirror.
It's an iron mirror.
Yeah.
There's some notes that I have here. Gosh, my notes are a jumble.
Mine are too.
Unfortunately. So iron is the metal most associated with magic, and this is specifically back in the Old Norse. And this is just ancient alchemy, just in general. But this would have been true more or less around this time. So worldwide, the metal most associated with magic is iron, because iron is not found in its pure state except as a meteorite, which comes from the sky.
Yeah.
Right? So it's known as the metal of heaven, and it's perceived as a gift from sacred powers. Her mirror is made of iron. It's a magical mirror that reveals her true self. Think Sleeping Beauty, right? The mirror tells the truth. The mirror always tells the truth. That's Sleeping Beauty, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one of the mirrors used to be considered like witchcraft.
It's Snow White.
Is it Snow White?
Snow White.
Okay, I got those confused.
It's her mother, right? Like mirror, mirror on the wall. Who's the fairest?
Who's the fairest?
It's Snow White.
And then I cannot lie. It's not you. It's somebody else.
Yeah.
And so that's the idea, is that mirrors tell the truth. But anciently, mirrors were not really a thing. Most people didn't know what they looked like. Back in the day, people didn't know what they looked like.
Look at I guess
if you get some still water with some good lighting and like crystal still, not crystal clear, because you don't want it to be clear. You want it to be reflective.
A bit murky.
You don't want to see through it. And you look and it's warply, but you could probably, that would be the closest you would ever get to actually seeing yourself. Like. And so other people would see you, but then mirrors showed up, and it was only for the rich at first, but it was called a looking glass. And it was kind of considered magical and demonic at first, where it's like, ooh, this is a portal to a new world, right? This is weird. And people were able to actually look at themselves. And people who looked at themselves too much were considered vain. It was an item for vanity. Anyway, so it was just a demonic thing until it became proliferated around the world. But a metal mirror that speaks the truth, and she's looking in it, and what she sees is just a mocking, berating voice, but it's her own mouth moving.
Yes,
so instead of hearing the voices or seeing the images of her dad, her memories, her old memories, we see, I think this is the first time we see it, it's herself. Yeah, she's just shouting at herself, and you see her face. This is so well done, I love it. You see her looking at the mirror from behind. She's just being so mean and shouting, and then she turns around so that we can see her, and she's just not making that face, right? Yeah. She's just like overcome with failure, I guess. Yeah. Like she just feels so bad, and you can just see it in her eyes, and you can just feel it. It's almost like a Gollum Smeagol kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So she's just berating herself while she's not. Her mouth isn't really even moving. But as you said, she's warming up that knife, and she decides. This is, I don't know, this is an interesting moment, but she decides to cauterize her own wound, but she does it while looking at the mirror, while looking at herself, which I guess would be why, but you don't think of it that way. You think she's looking at her shadow self as she's doing this, not looking at the wound to make sure she gets it right? Yeah. She's staring herself in the face, but not the her that she thinks, not the Lacan theory, mirror theory, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about like her shadow self. She's staring her shadow in the face. That's telling her what a failure she is, and she's like, F you, in your face, basically. I'm doing this. Yeah, she cauterizes the wound and just screams, and then it just kind of cuts from there.
Yeah.
But she's building her will. She's building her resolve in the face of everything she has to deal with. She's looking at it, and she's dealing with it and saying, I'm not giving up.
Yeah.
Like, and you know how hard that is for her. So that's
Right.
that's a pretty cool moment. It's pretty
Yeah.
powerful.
The narrating voice comes in and says some really interesting stuff as the camera's kind of moving in toward her looking at herself and yelling at herself, right?
Yeah.
Narrator says, stormy seas and lost souls. She's dreamt of this before. They say dreams are visions of our memories, thoughts and fears as seen by our inner eye. But what if each one of us is always dreaming even when awake? And we only see what our inner eye creates for us. Is this what hell is? It's already telling you this at this point, right? Her waking dream,
Yes.
that is what her inner eye is showing her, is hell. The hell that she's going through now, the Helheim, right? The area, the enemy she's fighting, the gods, all of this, right? A world shaped by Senua's nightmares. Maybe that's why people feared seeing the world through her eyes, because if you believe that Senua's reality is twisted, you must accept that yours might be too.
Yeah. I put that exact quote down here.
Really good.
Oh, very good. And it's kind of a whisper, too. It was out of the left side. It was just...
Yeah.
So I say this is why Carl Jung loved studying people with heavy psychoses or schizophrenia.
Yeah.
In part, he accepted that idea. He's like, if Carl Jung had this idea that we were always dreaming all the time,
Right.
basically. That very, almost always, basically everything you see is a projection, more or less. And then you're just constantly in a dreamlike state. But because of the collective unconscious, we can dream a similar enough dream to where we can get along with each other.
Yeah.
But every now and then, people who have psychoses, we're all dreaming, but that person's dream is different, and we don't know how to talk to them. We can't communicate. There's a disconnect, right? That dream is the ways of perceiving what is real and what is not break down with those psychoses, right?
Yeah.
And not to say that we ever perceive what's real, but at least we perceive what I think you're perceiving.
Yes.
And close enough to where we can agree
We
that
can agree
this
on
is a table,
the objective
right?
reality,
Yes,
right?
Exactly. We can agree on what we consider to be objective is what we both think is objective anyways. For the most part, that tends to be the case. But then all of a sudden somebody comes along who is seeing other things than we're seeing, and it's like it's breaking for everybody.
Yeah.
But it's scary to think that, well, what if she's right in some way? What if
what I'm seeing is not
What if exactly
real? Right?
And that's why Jung loved studying people with psychoses, because he felt like he was really studying people who were seeing the way that everyone else does, but their brain is bypassing one of the filters that is necessary.
Right.
And so you're seeing unfiltered brain activity in these patients with psychosis and schizophrenia. And that's fascinating, where it's like, oh my gosh, this is what we're all seeing, but we filter it out, in order to be sociable, right?
Yeah.
But these people don't have that filter, and that means you're getting more the raw essence of the true function of the brain, basically. And so, but that's scary, because it's like, well, wait, you're telling me that if I didn't filter it out, that I'd be seeing all this crazy stuff too, and I wouldn't know what's real? And it's like, yes, that is exactly what Jung is saying in many regards, right? Like that is what he's saying, and we all, like Jung thought he himself was going schizophrenic for a while.
Oh, really?
He did, like around the time of World War I. He was, and around his break with Freud, he was kind of losing it. Yeah. And he ended up pulling himself back. He slept with a gun under his pillow at night to kill himself, not to kill anyone else, to kill himself in case his dreams got too bad, too hard to handle.
That's crazy.
That's why. Anyways, it's crazy. But he ended up pulling through it, and he gained these incredible insights based on his experience with something akin to schizophrenia. I don't want to say he had it, because he would continue to have it, but he went through something that he was able to, most people can't, but he was able to come out of and then share with everybody. Like, this is what it's like. It's crazy.
Wow.
It's mad. And the people who see like that have something incredibly valuable to offer. And so he would just study them like crazy. Those were most of the patients he was interested in, were the schizophrenic patients.
I've never heard that story about sleeping with the gun and stuff.
That's it was around the time he wrote the Red Book. Have you heard of the Red Book and the Black Book? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So the crazy images he would draw and the crazy poems he would write, that was during his psychosis. That was the raw machinations of his brain being, put on paper, and the things he was drawing and all that stuff. It's part of this, and it's really cool stuff. But anyways, it's fascinating.
Okay, so she's kind of in this place. I really like the shot, actually. She's kind of like laying down. It's after she's already sort of like used the hot steel to like cauterize her wound. She's kind of just laying there, and she just looks so defeated. Yeah. But then Dillion's voice, she hears that, and she sees sort of like a spirit in the distance, and that's what gets her up again and gets her going, is trying to find Dillion. So she's going along the beach and kind of following his spirit around, right? Yeah. What were you going to say?
I was going to reference something about the cave, but that happens a little bit later.
Oh,
Is this the point on the beach where she comes up to the mirrors and the...
Well, this is, she's walking along the beach, and this is what leads her to the tree, right? And then that's where the sword of...
that's right.
Yeah. But like great. First, there's the flashback as she's walking up to that tree. There's the flashback of when she first kind of met Dillion, right?
No, okay, yeah.
And the narrator here says before she met him, she was not in a good place. Just a teenager, but not like the others, barely functioning. She rarely left the house. Her father, Zinbel, made sure of that. So he kind of like kept her at home in like a little pit, basically. Only occasionally did she venture out on her own, collecting firewood and herbs. Errands out in the Orkney Plains. That was her world, like this one, barren and lonely. And then she met Dillion. And at first, she just watched him from afar. That's when she kind of like would mimic his sword movements and things. But this was the first time he came to her and talked to her. And this was like a life-changing event. Like her relationship with him, her receiving support and love and encouragement from him was just like, after being abused her whole life by her father, right? Yeah. Was just this total life-changing thing. Yeah. Where she finally got the courage eventually to tell her father, I'm not staying here anymore. I'm going to go be with this boy now.
Which he would have been very glad to be rid of her, by the way.
Well, maybe in one sense, but he also feels some responsibility to the gods, right? To like cure her of her curse. He seems to believe that he can do that. That he can. He's the only one that can
exorcise
do that. He tells
her demons.
That.
Yeah.
At the same time, there's also an element of abuse here that I find very convincing and true to life, where it's like he's asserting his dominance and his control, which is something that abusers feel a need for, right?
Yeah, totally.
It's why they keep people in the relate. They do what they need to do to manipulate them to stay, so that they continue to feel like they have control over these people, right?
That's a psychosis in and of itself, almost. It's like, what is in your mind to make you think this is useful?
To feel the need.
What are you getting from this?
Yeah, to feel the need to dominate people like that.
Yes, that would
and usually it's because it was done to them.
Oh, yes.
It's almost always the case that a father abuses a son, and then that son is abusive to their children afterwards.
And it's hard to break that cycle after so many generations.
And that's something that therapists, it's like they really stress, is like, if we can just break that cycle with one person, then all these people who follow will be freed from that cycle.
Yeah, they have a chance.
If we can just get through to this person before they do that to their kids, and we can, get some healing there, like all these generations of people will be spared of a cycle of abuse, right? So anyways, that's kind of what's going on with her father abusing her like that, right?
Yeah.
Oh, she did see her mother. There was another place where she sees her mother kind of in the walls before she gets to this tree.
Okay.
Who gives her, she gives her reassuring words, have faith and let go. Let the tide carry you away. So
wise words.
let go, accept.
Relevant words.
Like,
yeah.
right, it's layered and peppered through here, but it's all about acceptance. Anytime, and this was something that the narrator voice said back with Valravn too, like she almost gave in, she almost sort of like let it go, right? But then she met Druth and learned about the Northmen and all those things, and that gave her like a new
kind of crazy
desire
himself,
to fight
yeah.
the darkness and things like that, right?
Okay, I got you.
So she keeps getting this advice to let go, let the tide carry you away, have faith, accept. But she's like, no, I have to keep going, and the shadow will come back. And there's another quote I have later where she's going into like that really dark sort of like section where she goes in to like that like dungeon-y sort of like area where Gramr is chasing her all over the place.
Oh,
right?
that's crazy.
I'm going to get to this quote later, but the shadow keeps telling her to keep going, keep resisting, keep fighting, like, keep moving forward. But the other voices are telling her to let go. And so like that's kind of the battle happening, the conflict happening in her mind. Like does she keep insisting on fighting this, or does she accept what's happened? So anyways, let's talk about the tree and the 4 trials here.
So with the tree, it's like there's like the root structure. You go into it,
right.
And then there's that sword, and it's got a bluish, the steel, or the iron, whatever it is, it's got kind of a bluish glow to it. And she goes up like, oh, great, this is what I need, perfect. She goes to grab it.
Yeah, because that sword is what will allow her to fight Hela.
So it's like, oh, the reason, and this would almost be another invention of her own mind, which is, oh, that sword wasn't strong enough. Yeah. I need a new sword. Instead of, I need to fix myself, it's an external thing. It's, oh, I need a new sword, right?
Yes.
Now, through the process, she does, I won't say fix, but she does, deal with some of her own personal issues as well. But she thinks that it's all external, so she's grabbing the sword, and that's where she's not able to do it.
Right.
She needs to do more work first because she's offending the gods. She is not deemed worthy of that sword. She's not strong enough. She's not powerful enough, and she needs to prove her worth first. And it's almost like what ends up happening when she does finally pull the sword out is probably what would have happened the first time she pulled it out anyways, right? In terms of everything's like, oh, don't do it, and everything closes up and she like gets lost. But it's like she needed to do stuff within her mind anyways before grabbing it out anyways, before she could convince herself to get the courage to actually act, right?
Right.
She just, it was a long process for her, and it's longer for her than most people, right?
Right. Yeah, so the legendary sword, Gramr,
which is a sword of
Norse
mythology.
Yes, but she has to pass the 4 trials of Odin in order to earn the right to wield it, right? So these 4 trials, they're all pretty good.
Yeah, I like them all.
The first one is well, I guess you can kind of do it in any order you want, honestly.
I suppose, because there's the 4 stones, you just go look at your reflection.
But the first one I did was the Labyrinth Shard trial. That's where you kind of go into, again, it's like a dungeon sort of structure, but there's all these branching paths. Yeah. And you have to light the torches so that you will look down and see where you've been already, and then you know to go the other way, right? That's kind of like the trick of this level is you use the torch to light, and then you look down both paths, and if there's a light, then it's like, I've been that way. There. Go this way. Yeah. If you don't light it, then you don't know that, and you'd be guessing at which path to take, right? Yeah. So after you finish with that, there's a really great scene at the end of it. This is where Senua confronted her father. This is where you see the scene where she actually decides she's going to leave home.
Oh, yeah. We see it kind of as though we're the perspective of her
Of
father.
her father. It's
Everything's
from
red.
his point of view.
Yes, everything's red, and we're the father.
It's the same voice that is the shadow, but it's not pitched as low.
Oh, okay.
But it's the same voice. You can clearly hear like that's the same actor.
Okay.
But it's just like his normal human voice, not like the deep, distorted shadow version of it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So she says, I've met somebody, the chieftain's son, and he's like, no boy is going to save you. No one can. When they see the rot growing inside you, they will turn their back on you. The gods can only fix you through my hand. You're going nowhere.
So it is a power trip.
It's totally a
It's
power
an
trip.
only I can do this. I'm the chosen one.
Yep.
Yeah.
You need me. You can't leave.
Yep.
Like
I am needed.
I'm going to keep my power over you, right?
Yep.
I wrote down here that I really liked how his suggestion of that there's a rot growing inside of her manifested in her current hallucinations through the rot growing in her arm that's like going up towards her head, right? So that's like it's manifested in a way.
The old thing people used to say, if I tell you not to think of an elephant, then the first thing you think of is an elephant.
Right.
But if you don't have the inhibitory filters of most people, and you're told something like there's a rot growing in you, it almost doesn't matter whether you believe it literally or not.
Yes.
Your mind thinks rot in me. That like you can't help but think of what it would. You can't help build an image in your mind of what that would be like, right? So, and then somebody who has a particular psychosis would allow that image would recur in their nightmares.
Yeah.
But as has been stated, the nightmares are all the time, even when you're awake.
Right.
Like it's so funny. It's almost as if none of this need be taken literally. That doesn't matter because the dream machinations are going during the daytime, and whatever you really think literally is objectively true or not, it's just completely irrelevant. You're going to see these images will be conjured up in your mind whether you want them or not, and you have to deal with them. And yeah, it sucks that you also can't tell what's real and what's not. But at the same time, like it's so interesting. As soon as he says that to her, I feel like I can see how this can kind of happen.
It like takes root in her mind, and like it lingers there.
And it manifests in some way,
Yeah.
And eventually you do believe it. You have those nightmares over and over, and it's like, yeah, there is something inside of me. You don't have to believe it right away. It eventually just, you accept it as true.
As she basically is starting to refuse him, like, no, I'm gonna leave. I'm not gonna stay here anymore.
Yeah.
This is super true again of what abusers do.
Yeah.
He strikes her.
Yep.
He's been yelling at her this whole time, but then his voice softens. Like after he struck her and she's on the ground, then he softens and he offers his hand, and he's like, "Come on, Senua," right? Like, everything's going to be all right. Like, take my hand, get back up. This is what they do. They abuse and then they soften as if like, "Oh, I'm going to help you." A lot of times, like what abusers will do is they'll do the physical abuse, but then they'll patch the person up, and it makes the person feel like, oh, he did me a favor by like nursing me back to health, kind of a deal, right? It makes them. It's a manipulation tactic and a gaslighting tactic.
Oh, but it works.
That gets them to feel like, oh,
they do care.
I owe him something, or like he really does love me.
Yeah, he is nice. It must be my fault.
Yeah, it's me that caused him to do that.
Yeah.
This is what they. This is the psychological game that they play.
That's totally true. That's totally true.
And it's usually
because you can't just be mean all the time. You have to have. It's like good cop, bad cop.
Yes.
But it's just you
to keep them there willingly, so you can keep your power over them.
Yeah.
Right.
Because if you were just violent all the time, she would run away.
Right. And so, anyways, that was, I felt really, really well done in the scene.
Yeah, very much so.
But again, this is because usually these type of abusive people were abused themselves. Yeah. So they grew up feeling like they had no control over their lives or over their safety
Yes.
and
So
there's
they
just
just need control.
constant fear all the time. And so they feel a
yeah.
need to have control over their life so badly that it carries over into controlling their family and finances and people and everything. They've got to control it all.
Yeah.
And so having control over people is a way of them feeling like I've regained the control I never had because of the people who abused me. It's a really complex issue, right?
Yeah.
But this is what they do. This is exactly what they do. They'll on the one hand be violent or be verbally abusive, but then on the other hand, and this is what confuses the abused and makes it hard for them to leave.
This is how authoritarian regimes will do things. But it's symboled, at least in part, by, is it Osiris who has the flail and the hook, right?
Yeah.
And it's Osiris or Horus, I can't actually remember which one, probably Osiris. But in the one hand, he has the whip to chastise, to whip the people. On the other hand, he has the hook, which is what a shepherd would use to corral and to bring them back.
In.
And it's basically the exact thing that governments do.
Yeah.
Anyways, but that is Egypt, right? That's what those symbols mean.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting. There's a big connection here.
So she doesn't accept it though. She's
she pulls her sword on him.
I'm leaving. Yeah, that's right. She pulls the sword on him. Like, get away from me.
Yeah.
I'm leaving now. And his last words are, you cannot escape the darkness. Your curse will make everyone suffer. You will have blood on your hands. Which is, again, what cements the idea that it is her fault.
Exactly.
He set that all up.
My dad said this would happen. Yeah, it gives him prophet status almost, even though it's like not a difficult prophecy to make.
She completely internalizes that.
Yes, and once again, whether she wanted to believe it or not is irrelevant. Once you hear the words, your mind takes it from there.
Yeah.
And you remember it. Then when your friends really do die, that's what you remember.
Yeah. So that scene was just really, really well done. Really, really well done. A lot of nuance in that, a lot of little things, but very, very convincing, very true to how these relationships are, these abuser-abused relationships. The next trial that I did was the Swamp Shard trial. This is a really good one, too. This is where you start to learn about the plague, right? So there was people were drinking the water, and the water was fouled, and she could tell. She would drink. She tasted it, and she's like, "There's something wrong with this water. Like, don't drink it."
Okay.
And nobody believed her, and they kind of laughed it off, right? And then everyone started getting sick,
right?
And then they realized that she had told them not to drink the water, and they were all getting sick, and they were like, "Did you do this?" Because again, her father had sort of set this up that she's cursed, right? And everyone was starting to believe this because, anyways, so you're going through this swamp, you're kind of doing the puzzles and things. This is the one where when you fix the stairway and you can go into the building, it's kind of just like this large mazy sort of area, and there's this fire demon or fire monster that's sort of chasing you.
That's it's pretty freaky.
It's intense.
That's really intense.
And you can't fight it. You're just basically
have to run,
collecting the runes that you need in order to leave this area.
Yeah, and then you only know where it is based on the noise and the brightness.
The bright orange light.
Yeah, you just got to get to where it's not so bright orange, and then you're okay.
And it'll see you, and then it'll start really chasing you. And it's like, oh man! And there's chains that hang, and if you go too fast through them, you'll make noise, and it'll come after you towards the noise. It's a really, it's a very I feel a lot of anxiety during this part.
Specifically this part, yeah.
It's just a very, very tense sort of little section, and a little bit of a break from the combat, which I think the combat is fine in the game. I like it.
Sure, it's kind of a Demon's Souls-esque type.
It is a bit repetitive, and I think a lot of people, who are, going to look more at the gameplay merits or lack thereof of this game, will say that the combat feels stale after a while. It's pretty repetitive.
Sure.
But this was at least one way to break that up a little bit, right? And the trial after this, which is really good.
Yeah.
Actually, it might be 2 later. But anyways, she ends up getting through the door and closing it as this thing's trying to like push through.
Yeah.
The scene that you see at the end of this is
It's
her.
where she's asking him.
Yeah.
I think he's telling her not to leave.
Yes.
Right?
She's feeling like she needs to leave because this plague is her fault, right? And Dillion's trying to comfort her, say it's not her fault, those sorts of things. But she is really doubting it now. She's like, she really wonders whether or not she is cursed, whether it is her fault. Like she really believes that that's the truth, right?
Yeah.
And he keeps encouraging her to, what he says is step out of the darkness and let them see her as he sees her. It's probably because she's withdrawing now, seeing that this has happened. She's starting to withdraw, stay inside, not go out, not be among them. It's like that's going to continue to increase the stigma about you. Come out and meet the people. Let them see you the way that I see you, and this will all change. But she doesn't want to. She is afraid of
the
first of all, that she is cursed, but second, or that she'll make it worse. But second of all, of what they'll think and say about her, right? So, anyways, that doubt is beginning to grow. So she's been living in the village, living with him for some time, and now this plague has happened, and she's starting to wonder whether it really is the curse, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, the next trial is the Tower Shard trial. I have a line here from Dillion where he says, "Would you give up the beautiful world that you and only you can see just to be rid of your nightmares? Maybe this is the price paid for the gift of the gods, the gift that the gods have granted you, a gift that makes you so very special in my eyes, just another part of the person I love." I'm taking note of that in particular. I want to kind of come back to this again when we get to the criticism section, because I think there's kind of 2 sides to this.
That line is specifically called out in one of the criticisms.
Yes. So I want to. We'll come back and revisit this, but the point that I want to make is, I think that this is what somebody, particularly at this time period, who does not understand what's really going on, does not understand what psychosis is.
Yeah,
right?
the psyche. Yeah.
This is probably the sort of thing that they would try to say to encourage it. Like, yes, you have this, but it's a gift from the gods. It's, her mother thought that she could see the spirits of the underworld, and that she had this special gift of sight, right? That it was like a supernatural gift that she had. And that's kind of the angle that Dillion is taking on this, or trying to get her to see that perspective. This is a thing you live with, but it's not a curse. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's what makes you special, to me, and things like that. But anyways, that's a line that we're going to double back on for sure. Okay. Oh, the Tower Shard trial is pretty interesting. This is where you go to those like masks and like you look into it and it like changes.
There's day and night.
The day and night version.
At least in part, that is, she has to do both, right? The night represents the scariness, the dread, the things she doesn't love, right, within herself. But she needs it she needs both. She needs to do the day and night, which symbolize different things. And she needs to keep going back to them to use both to build the bridge, right, to connect herself, right, properly.
Right.
There's some cool symbolism within that. The mask thing is fascinating, though. You just like look at it and you're there. I don't know. I love the way it was done. It's so funny when you play the game and it's presented as is, but then you look at it later and you're like, there's a psychological reading to it, which kind of changes the entire game.
Yes, the whole context. Right?
It's so funny, but I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it's there's a lot. I think this is the story of Loki and how he tricks. I don't remember which was it Sigmund, or which god was it that was like beloved by everybody, but there was like a prophecy or some kind of premonition. He was dreaming that he was going to die, and it was like, no, his mother went out and like made everything, every plant, every insect, every beast, like everything in the world, right? every tree, every mountain, every like lake and river and everything had to swear that they would not harm Sigmund. If I'm getting it's not Sigmund.
Is it
now that I think
Sigurd?
of it.
Sigurd?
No, Sigurd is
I
the
can't
son of
remember.
Sigmund, but
Oh,
this
okay.
is a different story. I can't remember the name of this god at the moment. But anyways, made everything promise. But the one thing she didn't ask to promise or to swear an oath not to harm him was mistletoe. Because like, oh, I thought mistletoe was, and because Loki disguises himself as like another woman and just kind of comes into like, basically to do espionage, to like learn,
Yes.
was there anything at
That's
all?
what Loki does.
Right?
Yeah.
And so she reveals to Loki, not knowing it's Loki, mistletoe was the one thing that she didn't make promise. So he goes and gets mistletoe and dips it in poison or something like that and gives it to one of the gods who's blind. And they're all throwing stuff at at this guy because he's like, I can't die, da, 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 da. Like I've escaped my fate. But he throws the mistletoe with the poison, and it's what ends up killing him, right? That whole story is kind of what's being told in all of this. One of the more interesting Norse mythology stories in the game, in my opinion. But that's kind of like, it's just Druth kind of recounting this throughout the entire trial of the tower.
Yeah.
And then at the end of that, she sees Dillion's spirit. She kind of runs out to him, and he sort of dives over the edge.
Oh, right at the end. Yeah, right then.
Yeah. Okay, and then the fourth trial, the last trial of Odin, is, to me, the most memorable one, the blindness shard trial.
Yeah.
This is where she cannot see. And this was kind of interesting, the way that they tried to
putting
do
her
this,
hands
right?
forward.
The idea is she is completely blind in this. But how do you
I know.
give
It's
the
a visual
player
video game.
give the player the ability to use her other senses like sound, touch,
Touch
and smell,
taste, yeah.
right? The senses that are left to her that she's using to navigate. The way that they sort of did this is they give you like a very small range of vision, or like,
Yeah. Just
so it's
what's
like
really
you can
close to
see
you.
it's very blurry.
Yeah.
But you have like this very limited amount of sight. She can't see that the way the player can.
Yeah.
But that's the way that they allow the player to have some sense of what's around her. But for her, it's what she's hearing, right, and touching. That's how she's navigating this. But anyways, there's all these monsters around, and it's like you're sort of
Yeah.
like slowly.
They're really creepy
They're
too.
really creepy monsters.
And you can avoid some of them. There's things hanging from the ceiling too.
Yep, like corpses
Like bodies.
and things. Yeah.
And you've got to like, oh yeah, very, very creepy.
And so Dillion's voice is guiding her the whole time through
Yeah.
this, right? Keeping her calm. And she's hearing all of these horrible monsters out there, and
Yeah.
she's sort of like quietly sort of navigating around them, right? But it's probably like because this game has a lot of like horror aspects to it, but this is like the best example of that. Like,
Yeah.
like the kind of survival horror elements that inspired the game, right? This is like where it really comes to light. But it's really terrifying stuff.
Yep.
But at the end of that, you get another flashback. At the end of each one of these, you kind of get a flashback or whatever.
Yeah.
But she's kind of coming out of like a psychotic trance at the end of this. And Dillion had been trying to like talk her back. So she doesn't realize how she ended up in these woods. Like, whoa, how did I get here? What's going on? And Dillion's like, remember, like, this happened, and you know, I've been here. So that was kind of the idea here is Dillion is guiding her through that darkness, right? That whole sort of section where she can't see anything. But it's like how do you call it? Like a warped nightmarish version of the
Parallel
memory
of a memory, yeah.
of him sort of guiding her out of the psychotic trance that she was having, where she couldn't remember how she arrived in this wooded area, right? So each of those memories are sort of associated with the nightmare trial she has to overcome each of the 4, which allows
Yeah.
her to finally take the sword of Gramr.
And the way she does the trials is fascinating because you got these big stone slabs that are like wet, and you can see the reflection on them.
Yeah.
And they use it as a loading screen.
Yeah.
But basically, you stand in front of it
Zooms in.
and you stare at yourself
Yeah.
for a long time, and then you're in a new place with a new trial to
Right.
do. And that's what she's doing. She's working in her own mind.
Yeah. Okay, so then with all the trials passed, she takes the sword. Then she sort of hears the shadow voice claiming that she'll pay a price for doing this.
Yes.
This is where you see the flashback of Dillion's father dying of the plague. And it's the first time where he, in his sort of grief, tells her that she has blood on her hands.
Yeah.
And this is what convinces her, I have to leave now. I have to go
Yeah.
out into the wilds and purge this curse, right? Because it was like he was the one person who believed that she wasn't cursed, that it wasn't her fault. He supported her, and all of a sudden he basically confirms that he had at least something.
Right.
He didn't want to accept that or whatever, but like at least some part of him had to have at
Yeah.
least been questioning that.
Had thought that, yeah.
Because
that's true.
if in grief, that's when someone's going to tell you the
Yes.
truth, right?
Yeah.
When they're angry, when they're drunk, or whenever, that's when
They'll
people
say
are
what
going to
they
tell you what they
really think.
really think. And that's kind of, I
Yeah.
feel like, what happened here,
Yeah.
is he at least had suspicions of it, even though he wouldn't tell her that, or at least
Right.
he didn't want to believe that that was the case because he loved her. Some part of him maybe did believe that. And in this moment, it comes out.
Yeah.
And
Well, but how could you not within their culture? How could you?
Sure.
There is no explanation for people like that in 800 AD.
yeah.
There's no explanation. So even if he thinks, no, she's a good person, this is the culture he grew up in. Like
Yeah.
he's got to wonder why she is like that. And when you wonder things and don't have an answer, your mind fills in the gaps. So
Yeah. And then she finds herself in this sort of hellish hallway. There's all these hands
Oh yeah.
reaching out.
Yeah, that was
There's a
creepy.
lot of fighting here.
Yeah.
A lot of shadow voice talking to her,
Yes, yeah.
telling her things like, just look around you, what hope is there for him? Even if his soul could be rescued, do you think he would thank you for what you've done to him, to his friends, and to his father? Why must they pay for your heresy?
There you go.
Things
there
like
you go.
that, right? She's fighting this shadow voice and all of these enemies. She ends up seeing her mother's face again there, but like she's just suffering and screaming, kind of wailing in the way, gnashing of teeth, as it's described that people in hell are doing.
Yeah.
She can't really reach her, right? So I put down here that I felt like this was the embodiment, or sort of like a metaphor, for the thoughts that she was having after Dillion's father died, right? That night, she gave up on her world to follow in the footsteps of her mother, to go to a place where the darkness couldn't reach her. And that she was feeling all of these things about herself, like, why must all of these people pay for your heresy? Even if you could save Dillion or whatever, do you think he would thank you for it? These
Yeah,
sorts of
that's a big-
deprecating thoughts.
That's a big question.
So anyways, you come to the end of that section, you see another flashback with Dillion where he's trying to dissuade her and comfort her. She's starting to say, like, my father was right all along about me, right?
Yeah.
And he's saying, who do you trust, him or me? And she doesn't know what to think there, right? Because she
Right.
really does believe that her father is right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Her father has too much of a hold over the development of her mind.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the fact that Dillion, in his grief, did say that she has blood on her hands. So it's kind of hard to trust
Sure,
him at
yeah.
that point.
Yep.
So that's when she decides to leave and go into the wilds. But anyways, she kind of comes out of that trance, that sort of hellish landscape, and she's got the sword. So now she's ready to descend and confront Hela,
Yeah.
and she can actually kill her with this sword, right? So then you kind of come to this creepy door. This is what I was talking about. This is the sort of like territory of Garm. And as she starts to cross the threshold, they do a really nice thing here with the sound design. It's like, and there's like this almost forceful, and she recoils at it and like falls over. It's like, whoa, there was some presence in there that was just really strong and terrifying. Like, what was that? And it's like right when she hits, because the door is open. It's just like an archway, right? And it's like as soon as she's in the threshold, it's just like boom. It's like it like repulses her back. It's just this presence that is so powerful. And it's just like, oh my goodness, what is that? And that the shadow voice tells her that Helheim is guarded by a beast named Garm. A beast guards Helheim. Garm is its name, and it knows you're here, Senua. It can smell your stink. What are you afraid of? How will you save Dillion if you're too much of a coward to step into the shadows? And that's when she gets up and goes through.
There you go.
So it's like, it's always about Dillion. Like Dillion is it makes all of this worth it, right? Like I have to continue for his sake. Now in this area, anytime you're in the shadow, in the dark parts of it, that's when Garm's presence is like, it's like he's chasing her.
Yeah, it's like there's an invisible, it's like, what do we call it? We used to do this a lot, a displacement map or something. And it's like this weird, but it's amorphous. It's not, you can't identify specifically, but it's really scary. It's really well done.
And you have to run into light, whether it's torchlight or she has to carry torchlight with her. When she's in the light, it repels that sort of like presence or force. But anytime she has to then step into the darkness, you got to run as quick as you can to the next source of light, or else it'll like overtake her, right? We get another scene with Senua's mother. This is not like one of those where her face appears like in the stone. It's like she's seeing almost like a spirit of her mother or something. It's behind a gate with like some like bars on it. And you learn more about the abuse from her father.
Right. It's so funny because the fact that she's behind bars gives you that symbolism there where
she's like in prison.
It's like she's in prison, but she's saying, oh, he'll understand. I'll just explain it or something like that. But you can tell just based on the imagery, like it's as if she's telling us this from the other side of a prison cell. Yeah.
And Senua here is alluding to the fact that her mother committed suicide. There was an apparent suicide that happened. It was her way to escape the darkness, right? So she's not properly remembering what actually happened.
Yeah.
Anyways, you keep, there's some really cool parts here where you have a torch. You're like kind of descending down some stairs and you come to a place where there's some water. And she's swimming, and she's barely keeping her head and the torch like above the water.
I know, it's crazy, yeah.
And it's just like, as soon as you have to dive, then that thing is going to start chasing you. And it's like, you're in the water, you got to swim through. Right. It's some really tense parts. It's really, really good. But you light all these torches, and you're kind of making your way through here. The beast is chasing you. She comes to a bridge, which she's kind of running from. She's running across this bridge because her light went out.
It finally like gets there.
It collapses. The bridge collapses.
Yeah.
And as she jumps to the other side, this is like the most gut-wrenching part of the whole game.
Know, dude.
She jumps to the other side and she climbs up, and Dillion's skull fell down into the pit.
It fell off her belt.
And she's just like, no. And the voice is, what have you done? You've lost him. It's over. Without his head, you'll never bring his soul back. His fate is sealed. Now, we've talked about the fact that this voice is like the voice of her father, but really it's her own shadow speaking to her. She's saying to herself, what have you done?
What have you done?
You lost him. You know, like, it's over now. Like, it was all for nothing. How dare you do this? It's just one of those moments, just like, oh no,
I
right?
know.
Like, oh, how could that have happened?
Or what are we gonna do now? Like, you really don't know as a player, like, what's gonna happen next.
And she's just like, all right, I'm going down. I'm going all the way down into that pit, and I'm getting that skull back, no matter what. But she's gonna have to fight Garm in order to do that, right? So anyways, there's some more puzzle solving and, you know, using torchlight and things like that. But you do eventually face Garm. It's a pretty good boss fight too.
Oh yeah, and he's big.
One of my favorites in the game. She fights him and slays him, and it's actually when she reaches the area where the skull is. So she gets to the skull and picks it up, and that's when Gramr emerges and you fight him.
Yeah.
So she gets the skull back. There's a really cool shot at the end of this because the shadow self kind of starts to apologize to her. So it says like it just wanted her to hate the darkness and to fight the darkness. It's like, I did all these things because I needed you to, understand the importance of the urgency of fighting this darkness. But the camera is sort of going back up through the pit, and it's like showing her at different stages of the ascent.
Oh, okay.
So it's like it'll come up and it'll show her like
Right.
rounding a bend here, and then it'll like kind of turn and come over here, and it sees her coming out this way. So it's like her ascent up back through the pit again to the top. She's her inner shadow self is sort of like explaining this and being a little bit apologetic for the way that it has abused her, right, and talked down to her. But I did it because I knew it was so important that you fight this darkness and be rid of this darkness, right?
Right.
It's a really cool shot. And at this point, Senua decides what she's willing to sacrifice. She realizes there needs to be a sacrifice. We talked about that a little bit last time.
Yes, yeah.
Odin had to give the eye.
Had to give his eye.
So she's going to sacrifice her life at the end of this to save Dillion. She's like totally accepted that as being her fate at this point. She even says that she's no longer interested in fighting her past. She's only interested in saving him, right? So she's not afraid anymore.
Right.
Of the darkness.
Which is what happens when you descend to the bottom of the darkness.
Right.
So the idea of Yggdrasil, right? You got the tree, and I think this is something Carl Jung said, I can't remember. No tree can reach up to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell, right? So the idea being, you have to go, if you want to go up here, you have to be willing to, if not go down here. The further down you can go, the further up you can go.
Right.
And so we kind of see that here. Once she's conquered the lowest darkness, she can come back up and she can go to a higher place. And she has the confidence now that she can do it.
Right. And she's not afraid anymore. She exhibits almost no fear of anything.
Yeah.
This is where the game kind of stops being scary at this point.
Yes.
It's like...
And she's even willing to leave behind some of these voices that are talking to her, right? Because at this point, do we come up to that big
That's
mirror?
basically what happens. You get to that bridge, you have to repair, you fight a ton
you
of
gotta go look
dudes
at it.
on the bridge,
Yeah.
and then you go in the door, and there's that mirror at the end of it. And she's kind of going through there, and this is where she sees herself, and then a version of herself comes out of the mirror.
Walks around her and is like, don't do this. Like, this is fine. You probably can't do it anyways. Like, let's just stay here.
Right.
And she leaves that person behind. And this is where you get a good visual representation for what she's doing all this time. She is killing parts of herself.
Yes.
Over and over.
Yes.
And I took a note on this right here.
Because the voices are telling her as she's walking towards that mirror, because it's kind of like down the hallway. As she's walking, you hear the voices saying like, don't, I don't want to die.
Yes.
I don't want to die. Don't kill me.
Yes. And what's funny is right before that, you get that harsh male voice of her father apologizing to her, more or less. And it's like, these parts don't want to die. Now,
No.
They know that she doesn't
she
need them anymore.
dies,
So now
all the
they're like,
voices-
oh, well, I did it for your good. And hey, let's just call it quits here, because they have their own sentience. It's crazy. But I wrote here, well, do you have a...
Well, I was just going to say her
Go ahead.
response to them saying like that they don't want to die is, I'm sorry, I didn't ask you to be a part of me. If you
Yes,
don't want to
yes.
die with me, then leave me alone.
Exactly.
Right? So,
This is my life. Yeah, she's finally taken charge. What she's fighting and killing throughout the game are parts of herself, walking through the mirror, and the doubting part of herself dies. We watch it disintegrate.
Yes.
So in the end, she's killed a part of herself. She's going through her own psyche, confronting and killing the parts of herself that she doesn't want to integrate with, right? So, and then I go into the ending here, but we don't have to go there right now.
Yeah, so the dialogue here is really good. So that mirror self steps out.
Yeah.
And it's saying, talking about the villagers and things like that. They were afraid, like children scared of the dark. And she says, so was I. And then the mirror self says, they changed, or they made up monsters to fill the void. That doesn't make them real. And then Senua says, they made them real.
That's a decent response, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like because they chose to sort of believe in this curse or whatever, they made it all real for me and everything that ended up happening. And then the mirror self, no, please don't leave me. And then, like you said, disintegrates as she walks through to face Hela.
You know what's great? All throughout the game, she, at least for several points throughout the game, she'll look kind of at the camera or at someone around her, which would be one of these voices, these Furiae.
Yeah.
And she says, help me. Will you help me? Right? And it's funny, she's relying on these voices around her to help guide her, right?
Yeah.
And what she's doing now is she's leaving them all behind. She doesn't need their help anymore, and she won't accept it. When she's afraid, it would help her to absolve herself of a little bit of responsibility to ask for help from these forces that are guiding her life, you know.
Right.
But at this point, she is taking charge. It's really cool.
I took some quotes down here that I thought were really good. Hollow your soul and let go of the Senua of old, for there lies your weakness, and the darkness will find it. So it's about letting go.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like the stories, the old stories, is it? The noble warrior facing evil in search of victory and honor. Clear dividing lines. No, this place is not quite like that. It's as if it knows that true torment lies within, memories you cannot defeat, cannot escape. This is her hell. Then we got Druth. I wrote down that Druth reveals that the man he was before was a coward, and because he could speak the Northmen's tongue, and under torture, right, he led them to the treasures and slaves that they sought. So he basically, because he could speak to them, he knew their language, right, and because he was afraid of the torture that they would inflict on him, he sort of led them around, like told them where the villages are. So Druth was a coward who led the Vikings to a lot of destruction that they caused among the Celts. But he also reveals here that there was a man dressed in black who betrayed her people, her specific village, right? And she realizes, because it shows her father is dressed in that black sort of shaman's robe. So it was her father who actually betrayed the people. It wasn't her fault. It wasn't because she was cursed. He was the one who did that, right? Probably to get out of being tortured or killed himself.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Right? To like save his own life. And so he was the one who led the Northmen to her village, and that's why it all happened, right? Wow. But then this is where it's revealed that her mother did not commit suicide, but was burned at the stake by him. And she says, she's furious as she's realizing all this. I do understand. You cursed me with your own madness. I was just a child. You created this darkness so you could hide behind it. It was all a lie. You are a lie. She didn't defy the gods, speaking of her mother. She defied you, and so you killed her. You tortured her. You killed her. You are the darkness. You told everyone I was cursed. They believed you. I believed you. It was all him. He created the darkness. He created the curse. He created all of this madness. It was his abuse that basically stigmatized her condition, or the experiences she had, the hallucinations and things. And this is kind of the point that was made in last episode during the development history section. It's not the symptoms themselves that are like the problem, or like where the mental illness comes from, or where the damage is done. It's in the stigma that's associated with it.
Yeah.
The way that people will see you,
right,
and shame you, or like turn away from you, or be afraid of you. That's the part that makes it bad. And so, her symptoms were not a problem until her father defined those symptoms as a curse and as darkness and as this horrible punishment of the gods and these things.
Because then she'd try to get rid of them. But as she would try to get rid of them, they would cling on harder and become a bigger and bigger problem.
And it was what stigmatized the whole village against her. It's what made them see her as cursed and like someone who brought a plague to them. That is the problem. It's not the symptoms that are the problem. It's the way people view those symptoms and the way that they treat you because of it that causes the damage. And that's exactly what her father did. And she's realizing that all now.
Wow.
Anyways, she's sort of going back and forth with that voice, right? So she'll yell at him. He'll sort of say things back to her. You're trying to trick me again with your lies. I know he's here. You took him from me. You have him. Dillion is gone. Dillion is dead. Let him go now. Let go of your battle. Let go of redemption. Let go of Dillion. And this is one of the more brilliant moments of the whole game, is when you finally reach the end there where Hela is at.
Yeah.
There's waves and waves and waves of enemies.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can sit there and continue fighting
for a long time.
Indefinitely, forever.
As long as you can fight.
As proficient as you are in the battle, you can fight forever. But that's the point, is that it's not until you let go of the fight.
As the player.
It's not as the player. It's not until you let go of Dillion. It's not until you accept the reality here that you cannot win. This fight is pointless. It's not real. That you let go as the player and let them kill you, that you can actually finish the game. I thought that was a brilliant way mechanically to tell the story. It was really, really well done. Like one of the better examples, I feel, of gameplay telling the story.
Telling the story through gameplay.
It's really, really good.
Yeah, cool. Nice.
And so it's like, the first time I'm playing it, I had gotten pretty good. I was just fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. I was like, dude, when does this end? Holy crap. It's like, I was trying to hit Hela, and you can't hit Hela.
Right.
And they just keep coming. And it's like, finally, I was just like, I don't know what to do.
Right,
I guess I guess you have to die or something. And that's exactly what it is. You have to let go. You have to let it go. You have to accept that Dillion is dead in order to finish the game. I just thought
that's very cool. That's extremely cool.
And as she lays down, takes that sort of death blow, you just hear, let go, Senua, let go of your battle, right? And then she's laying there and Hela is approaching. She kind of picks up the sword, right? And she's looking down on Senua, who's just really struggling, just in pain, agony, all of this horrible stuff that she's had to go through to get to this point. Yeah. And this is the part we were talking about earlier with the laughing. So Senua says, if you're a lie, she's speaking to Hela, if you're a lie and there is no darkness, then you never took him from me, did you? And I can't save Dillion. So it's like the reality of that is starting to hit.
It's just hitting her.
But she still can't accept it. And so she starts sobbing, but then that turns into a laugh.
Yeah.
Kind of like a maniacal laugh.
Yeah. Just like not ironic, but like, this can't be real.
Yeah.
Like, I'm ridiculous kind of thing.
Is that what you want me to believe? After all you've done to me? She almost got there to acceptance and then immediately sort of like swung back the other way.
This is her identity.
Yeah.
It's hard to just get rid of it like that.
After all you've done to me, to him, no, you're not a lie, but you are a liar. You've crawled into me to confuse me and deceive me, but I know he's here. I know you have him. I will give you my life. That's what you want, isn't it? My soul. Take it. I'll be your slave warrior. I'll fight with you at Ragnarok. Because Ragnarok is kind of like the apocalyptic sort of prophecy of the Norse mythology, right? Yeah. Where like all of these gods are going to do battle.
Yeah.
If you release him, but if you won't, you'll have to kill me because I've got nothing left. No fear, no hate, no quest, nothing. And you will have no power over me. and then Hela stabs her.
Yes. And she falls.
And she sees Dillian
And
sort
then
of
Dillion's there, yeah.
because she's kind of against the ground, and it's like underneath.
Yeah.
Like
and their hands
mirrored.
are kind of touching.
Yeah, their hands are touching. And he says to her, I learnt the hard way to not be afraid of death, Senua, because a life without loss is one without love. Turn your back on death, and you turn your back on death, and you only see the shadow that it casts. The longer you hide from it, the longer the shadow grows, until all you can see is darkness. When our time comes, we must look death in the eye and embrace it as a friend. Only then can we let go of our fear and emerge from our darkness. Yeah, I think this is a really important thing that everybody at some point kind of has to come to terms with.
Oh, everybody.
Everyone has to come to
Always.
terms with their mortality at some point in their life, right?
Yes.
And I remember I was probably maybe 10 or 12 years old or somewhere in that range. That was the first time in my life I started to think about death. Like the fact that I'm gonna die someday.
Yeah.
Like that's going to happen. There's gonna come a point where I die. And I was really, really freaked out about it. And every night when I would go to sleep, I would have a hard time going to sleep. This was probably for months, where I would just think about I'm gonna die someday.
Death anxiety, yeah.
Yeah, this death anxiety, right?
Yeah.
And, that sort of came and went, over the years. Maybe I stopped thinking about it, got distracted. My life, was busy, whatever, going to school, working. And then it would kind of come back again, and I would have this anxiety about it. And I really like that line. The longer you hide from it, the longer the shadow grows, until all you see is darkness. When our time comes, we must look death in the eye and embrace it as a friend.
So that parallels something along the lines of a sunset, right?
Yeah.
So your life, you're born, the sunrise happens, it goes up, everything's good. As the sun begins to set, it's when the shadows start getting longer, right?
Right.
And so if you recognize the sun is setting and you know your time is up, then enjoy the beauty of the sunset and go.
Yeah.
But if you hide, you find a nice place to hide from the sinking sun that is your life. And the shadows keep going longer. Eventually the sun goes down and it's just dark.
Right.
And you die alone and afraid instead of bravely greeting the light. Anyways,
Right.
It's beautiful. I like the long shadow analogy there.
Yeah, it's really great. And it's something that everyone, well, I guess not everyone does do it, but everyone should.
Yes.
If you want to not live with that anxiety.
I feel like
or
people do it
in
less
the
now.
moment of death, to not just be completely terrified and regretful and all of these things and have it be a horrible thing, right? You've got to come to terms with your own mortality at some point in life.
Yes.
And I think that that's a process. It's not something that happens, overnight. But it is something that I used to have a ton of anxiety about as a kid, and maybe a little bit as a younger adult in my early 20s. I used to kind of just obsess about that a little bit. And now it's gotten to the point where I feel a lot more at peace about that. It's if this were to happen, I'd be okay. I'm not going to sit there and be afraid of it, right? Because what else can you do?
That is your only option. is
It's
to
the
do
only
that.
choice you
But
have.
I could be wrong about this. I never met anyone from 1,000 years ago. But I feel like people in today's modern culture are more afraid to die than
Maybe.
previous cultures.
Maybe.
We're around death less.
Yeah.
We don't know as many people who've died, especially at our age. Maybe there may be a few, but
That's true.
For the most part, people our age 1,000 years ago, almost most of the people are dead.
Yeah.
Right. The average lifespan was somewhere around 35 or 40. Right.
Yeah.
So it's most of the people you've ever known in life have already died by the time you're at that age.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It's really.
That's nowhere near true.
It's really crazy.
For
Today,
me, nowhere near true, right? But I feel like there's, and we also have medicines and things, and it's I could live to be 100, maybe 120. Some people can do that, right? Or technology will help me live longer, and you just want to think that you just won't have to worry about dying. But back in the day, it was like you were being prepared for death at a very early age.
Yeah.
You were around it, you understood it, there's nothing you could do about it, and there was a religious aspect too that was like, it wasn't the scare that it is in modern times, right? I'm sure everyone was still afraid to die back then too, but I feel like it's a little different now. It's harder. I think it's harder. So my note that I took here says the last thing that she lets go of is her attachment to Delian. It wasn't Delian, but her desire that she still ended up sacrificing something, right? It's a part of herself that she let die. Throughout the game, she is sacrificing parts of herself that hold her back so that she can move forward. It wasn't just Delian, it was a part of herself that she let go of. Death cannot be conquered, only your fear of death.
Yes.
And that's a tough demon to conquer.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Overcoming the fear of death is almost the same as overcoming death.
Yes.
You still die,
Yes.
but you live a full life.
Yes.
And you live a life full of hope and forward thinking and stuff, instead of looking back and what's the word, regret, more or less, or fear of missing out kind of thing.
Yes.
Like, oh no, if I die, then I'm not going to be around for all these things.
Right.
But you can't conquer death, but you can conquer your fear of death, and that's the only thing that you really can control.
Right.
So do it.
Yeah. And I feel like this memory of Delian that she's having, where he's saying these things about when our time comes, we must look death in the eye and embrace it as a friend, is indicative of the fact that she's realizing he had already gotten to that place.
Right.
So he's not tortured in his death the way that she is being tortured by it.
Yeah.
He was able to accept it. As awful as, no one wants to feel the pain.
The way he died.
The way that he died.
Yeah.
But the death itself was a fact that he had accepted. And it's the acceptance, again, that is the important central theme of the game.
Exactly.
He had accepted his death.
Yeah.
He was at peace with that. And it was in remembering that he was at peace with that she's finally able to let him go.
Yeah.
So we see Hela taking the skull of Delian and dropping it sort of into the ocean there. But as the camera pans down and watches the skull descend, it comes back up and Hela is replaced by Senua.
It was Senua.
Senua, it was Hela.
It was herself the whole time.
It was herself the whole time. And she says, "Goodbye, my love." And the last quotes here from the narrator: "Do not mourn the waves, the leaves and the clouds. Even in darkness, the wonder and the beauty of this world never leaves us. It is always there, waiting to be seen again. This is where my story once began, and so it has to end here, because I cannot go further than this, or I cannot see further than this."
Yeah.
And then Senua looks into the camera and says, "Follow us, we have another story to tell." And then it says, "My friend, go with her." And that's where the game comes to an end. What was your notes?
I have tons of notes. I just didn't know where to put them in terms of the actual story, because the story is so different from the way it's presented, and a lot of my notes are more thematic and general than the specific, plot points of the story. But so one of the things that I have here is I typed in, and this is very relevant with Hela and the fact that she is Hela, right? Hela is just a part of her.
Yes.
And they're one and the same, right? So myth is a projection of the inner psyche, according to Carl Jung, right? So parts of the psyche are represented through myth. A modern way of interpreting ancient gods is that they represent emotions, principalities, geographic features, ideologies, and natural laws, right? Those were the gods, right? And I mentioned last episode that the demon angel, they rise to the level of a god when they have control over fate, right? And so these were gods. They governed the fates of mankind. You were possessed by them. You were controlled. Sometimes they would show mercy, other times justice. So I put here as an example, a fisherman was entirely subject to nature when he would go out onto the sea. A reverence for the god of the sea is in order when faced with the reality that you have little control over whether or not you die in the ocean, right? It's just not in your hands. Your fate is governed by an unseen entity, and you must respect it, right? Yeah. You fear it, you respect it, you pay it reverence, you don't offend it, and you go about your business and hope that the gods will have mercy
Favor
upon
you,
you,
yeah.
right? And I love it. I really love looking at the gods in that way because it puts a lot of it into the human psyche. This is a part here. So she talks to us as though we're there when she says,
Right.
will you help me, right? We are one of her gods. We're one of the Furii, sure, but we're also the thing that controls her fate, right? And she's acknowledging that through breaking the fourth wall. So we're her god. And this is relevant to the very end of the game here. We ultimately control her fate, and in the end, we are the only ones allowed to accompany her on her next journey, right? So she's gotten rid, she's trimmed the fat, she's gotten rid of all of the
Furies.
fates and the things that controlled her fate, right? Except for us, and we're there. And she says, you can come.
Yeah.
And it's in part because, we were there with her the whole time. We didn't hold her back. She went forward. We gave in at the same time she gave in or whatever. I don't know if there's a huge story thing that's meant to be conveyed there.
Sure.
But I feel like there's something, right? Because
Yeah.
she's breaking the fourth wall for a reason. And we are clearly mentioned as one of the Furii. And so I feel like we're the ones who controlled her fate and that she liked the way that went. So she'll keep us around.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's fun. And then here at the end, I've got that this game is all about resolve and not skill. In fighting and in her biggest moments, it's all about her will, her resolve, her courage to push through pain and reach her goal. That's the only fight. If she loses at any point, that's why she lost her resolve. So she's in control of her own fate as long as she accepts the things that are outside of her control, right?
Yes.
So I feel like that's relevant to why she accepts us still, right?
Yes.
Because the things that are outside of her control, she let go of. But there are still some things within her control, and we kind of like supplement her with that.
Yeah.
It wasn't her fault. It isn't her fault. She can move on now. Though many more transformations and trials still await her, it seems she's full of hope and can face the future without looking to the past because everything's white and you kind of get that sunrise feeling. You feel like it's not dark anymore. We're finally seeing the light.
Right.
Ooh, that does it pretty well for my notes on the thematic
Yeah.
material.
One last thing I wanted to say on this was on the final episode of Final Fantasy Tactics, I put a pinned comment on it that said, next game we're covering is Senua's Sacrifice. And,
Yeah.
Then Vagrant Story will be after that. Hopefully you guys can join us for Hellblade. And there was someone who commented and said, oh man, that game was so depressing and so dark and so difficult, I really struggled with that one, and I don't know about, something along those lines. I don't know about joining you on it.
You can just watch the podcast. You don't have to play the game.
Yeah, but this is what I wanted to say about it, is I think it's all sort of embodied there at the end, right?
Yeah.
The story to me is so beautiful because the message here is that that the shadow grows longer and longer and longer and longer.
The more you wait,
the more
you prolong.
that you run away from and prolong
run
the
away.
acceptance. Mm-hmm. So yes, the game is dark. Yes, the
Yeah.
game is depressing. Yes, the game is traumatic and difficult. But it's all a metaphor for this idea that the longer you run away from accepting what you can't control and accept reality, acceptance is a healing thing. It's a healing process.
Yeah.
You suffer through something. You go through those stages, right? But acceptance is at the end of that. That's when you're able to move on.
Yeah, it's like the light
Yes.
at the end.
The longer you, as I said in the last episode, kick the can down the road, the worse, the more darkness and awful feelings and all this stuff will be trapped, and you'll just keep re-feeling that
Yeah.
over and over and over, reliving that experience and never being able to move on from it. That's what the metaphor, all of this dark, heavy, depressing stuff is representing. And the only way through that in your life, all the trauma that you're going through and these things, is acceptance.
Yeah.
Acceptance. Acceptance is the message, and it's so relatable to every person's experience, because you're gonna suffer in this life. You're gonna go through things that you feel you just can't deal with, and so you're gonna try to avoid it or run away from it, or I can't deal with that right now, right? Like, let's repress that or bury it or not think about it, or I'll deal with that tomorrow or whatever it might be. And that will keep that darkness and that shadow extending more and more and more until you accept it. And that's the story of Hellblade, and that's why I think it's so beautiful, and that's why it's one of my favorite games, is because it's not a dark, depressing, awful, horrible story.
No, the story is not.
It's a super hopeful and a super hopeful story in that it shows you that there is a way out of that.
If you can get to the end of it.
If you can accept, right?
So I mentioned at work that I was playing this game, and the only other person who had played it told me that they quit halfway through.
Exactly.
And so it's like if you didn't get to the end, you don't know what you're missing. You don't understand the game very well.
Yeah.
But that's fine. I mean, if it's too scary, it's too scary. You don't want to keep playing. I get it.
But that's kind of almost the point. It's like you couldn't accept sort of like, I don't know how to put that. I think you know what I mean, right? Like your inability to grapple with that, you know, to I can't deal with this. I can't I can't look at that right now. I got to hide from it.
Yep. The gods will punish you.
That means that you'll miss out on the beauty of the resolution to those feelings. Anyways, I'm just repeating myself at this point, but I just find it to be such a beautiful story.
Yeah, I agree.
When all is said and done. And it really surprised me. Like the thematic depth of the game. I remember, seeing trailers for this game and being like, oh, that looks really good. Like, wow, like a very impressive looking game. Like I'm excited to play that. Maybe for the same reason that I might have been excited to try God of War, the PS4 God of War or something like that. It's like, it's in that vein. I like that, that's kind of a cool setting. And I had no idea like what it was actually gonna be about. And like I got to the end and then sort of like started to think about it and sort of, discuss it with people online. It was like, dude, that's really deep. And, as an allegory, as a metaphor for like the trauma that we kind of go through in our own lives, right? Like it's kind of like Journey in a sense, and we'll probably eventually do.
Oh, I hope so.
We'll probably do a podcast on Journey at some point too.
It's just less creepy.
But it's similar in how it uses metaphor for just like the concept of what it means to live, or like what a life is like, what the journey of life is, right?
Sure,
This is sort of similar, but it's all about trauma and acceptance. And I just think it's absolutely perfectly executed there at the end. It's really, really good.
Well, I agree.
So, all that being said, now I want to get into addressing some of the controversy around how mental illness was portrayed in this game. There's a Polygon article written by Dia Lacina, and I think there are a couple good points made in this. And so that's why I want to bring it up, because I want to be fair in doing that and saying like, maybe there are some ways in which it could have been better about how it went about this. At the same time, there are a lot of things in this that I feel like maybe people are missing the point a little bit.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, I agree. I read the same article, and in some ways, it's like, oh, you assume playing this game, oh, this must be just what it's like to be schizophrenic, right? You assume not being schizophrenic,
right?
You assume that this is some type of accurate representation, right? I have no idea if it was accurate or not, right? So that's where an article like this maybe can reveal the points where it's like, that's not really what it's like. But it's a fine game, but it doesn't really address, at least not the way I experience it, right? And, fair enough. But I don't think I'll ever understand what that's like.
Well, it's impossible.
And so through a video game, it's at least as close as I've gotten so far in my life.
It's an attempt to help neurotypical people understand it.
Exactly. So in that vein, you could say it was made for
neurotypical
people. Therefore, the critique coming from neuroatypical people would be, that it's wrong and it's a stereotype or something. I don't know. There may be something there.
Sure.
But it was made in order to be a more general thing, not specific to one person's condition, right?
So the thesis here is sort of wrapped up in a quote from Dillian.
Yeah.
Would you give up the beautiful world that you and only you can see just to be rid of your nightmares? This is the point.
As if that's a small thing, just to be rid of a couple nightmares once or twice. Yeah.
That's the point she's really addressing here that I think is a good point on her part.
Oh, sure, yeah.
That's
it
kind of the
trivializes
thesis.
it a little too much.
Yes.
It's like, no, these nightmares are my entire life, and they suck. Yeah.
Yes. Right.
Yes.
So I'm going to kind of read through this.
Okay, go ahead.
Dillian is the sole point of protagonist Senua's quest into hell. The man that Hellblade Senua Sacrifice sets up as the person who understands her better than anyone ever has or could. Her light in the darkness, right?
Yeah.
And here he is invalidating not only her mental illness, but her desire to seek wellness. It's part of the well-intentioned neurotypical sentiment that permeates this game, invalidating the experiences of people with mental illness, even as it seeks to promote understanding. So, this idea that she wants to be rid of her nightmares, which she's saying is embodied in seeking wellness.
Yeah, Dylan's just saying accept
being
it.
invalidated by saying, no, your experience is a good thing, actually.
And acceptance is your path. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So I get that, right? Like, I get what she's saying there. I think that there's a point to be made in that.
Yeah. Where it's like, hey, you can just accept that your life sucks, but that doesn't make your life suck any less when, you're not seeing things the way everyone around you is.
Right. I'm going to skip forward a little bit here because she talks about how there's a warning at the beginning of the game.
And she thinks it's a show,
Cautions players who've had similar experience to take care when playing, and provides a website with contact information for helplines.
Yeah, she actually is a very good example of that.
Yeah.
She talks about how she hardly could play this game. She needed to put it down after every few steps and go for a walk around the block. Yeah. And it's like, well, the game did say that if you experience things like this, maybe don't play it, right?
Yeah.
And she may be validating that point, at least to some degree.
Yeah. Okay, so she says, it left me holding a bag full of questions. I couldn't tell if I was being pandered to, postured at, or just being used. Now this to me, I don't know, we'll get into it. I didn't know who this game was for. Perhaps I should have listened to the warning and begged Sony for a refund, citing I'm severely mentally ill, and the game says I probably shouldn't play.
Oh, that's more or less what I said.
I'd be lying if I didn't admit that cynicism crept through me like Senua's black rot. Despite it all, I have never wanted to be proved wrong by a game more than I have with Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. The representation of mental illness in video games is fraught, often irresponsible, and fundamentally non-existent outside of indie developers. Reviewers, albeit with no stated history of psychotic mental illness, have praised Hellblade's sensitivity and insightfulness. Even friends with mental illness said the game resonated with them, that this was the AAA depression quest the games industry has been waiting for. So there's an important admission in that. And this is true even of the people who were consulted who have the symptoms in that the Ninja Theory consulted with. Some of them do feel like this was a representation that validates my experience, that like spreads awareness about my experience, that is true to my experience. It was not true to this particular person's experience.
And
it can't be for everybody.
It can't be. Not everyone's psychoses will be even remotely similar, I would say.
Yeah.
They will all be so drastically different based on life experiences, based on whatever chemical or biological difference there is within the function of the brain. Two people with the similar issues will not have the same experience.
Yeah.
And that's a huge difficulty in making a game like this.
She does try to, in fairness, address the fact that this is the first time she's ever heard of where a studio contacted mental health professionals, people living with mental illness, rather than portraying them as in some haunted sanitarium that has the stench of Howard Phillips Lovecraft, right? Where it's just like it's all portrayed in a way that's makes it very scary and stigmatizes the whole thing, right? So Ninja Theory's willingness to do the work in mind is with that in mind that she started to play it, and so she was eager, to play it. She says that the research shows in the game, while playing, I saw the gamut of symptomatology classically associated with psychosis, and was alternately guided, taunted, and upbraided by auditory hallucinations, which the game calls the others, and are credited as furies. Senua hallucinates glowing runes with colors and light that are either amplified or dimmed. Her head darts furtively back and forth, scanning for danger that hushed faraway voices, for the danger that hushed faraway voices and perhaps imagined movements might portend. Fire spontaneously erupts from buildings as Senua's focus shifts between this reality and another. Hypervigilance, auditory and visual hallucinations, flashbacks, agitation, intrusive thoughts, delusions, all the classic hallmarks of psychosis are brought to bear in Hellblade. I made my way through a beautifully crafted, decrepit Viking landscape of wooden villages, sacrificed corpses, and smoky black Viking demons. What I'd come to learn were manifestations of the trauma Senua experienced shortly before the game began. This particular psychotic episode is fueled by two triggering events: the slaughter of her village and boyfriend Dillion, and the stories that a mentally ill mystic Druth told her about the Norsemen. Druth can sometimes act as a guide, but his primary purpose is to inject Norse mythology into the game. I found myself largely ignoring these moments because they had little bearing on Senua's present realities. So that's one thing that I've tried to bring up, like the reason I think that they're in the game, is Senua's own attempt to lend authenticity to this experience. So that, because as long as it is real, that means Dillion can be saved. And that was all embodied in that last quote there at the end of the game when she's talking to Hela, right? Where she says, if you're a lie and there is no darkness, then you never took him from me, did you? And I can't save Dillion. So that's why she wants to believe all the Norse stories. Because that means Hela's real if those are true.
There's some possibility.
And then I can save Dillion if that's true. That's the reason why the Norse stories are there, in my opinion. So anyways. Her realities are more outwardly presented via Hellblade's puzzles, which involve using an aspect of her mental illness to see things differently. They're about finding connection and patterns where none really exist. It's a creative psychological process called pareidolia, and it's something we all engage in. It's believed that people with psychosis are more adept at this kind of creative process and involuntarily engage in it more frequently. Perhaps that's true. I spent hours struggling to solve environmental matching puzzles in this game, seeing the specific rune shape everywhere. I turned and matching it up perfectly, only for the game to conclude it wasn't the specific shape I needed. This is something that I feel is really interesting.
It's hard to avoid that.
I mean, how could you,
These are basic shapes, It's like you're going to see that everywhere.
Especially if you have heightened pareidolia, because you're a person with some of these symptoms, like she is, right? Yeah. It's like, oh, there it is, oh, there it is, oh, there it is. Whereas like maybe somebody who's neurotypical wouldn't have seen that symbol as often in the environment as she was seeing.
Yes.
It's like, but now she can't solve it because she's got to find exactly the right one that the developers put in there for you to solve. And so it's like, but I see it here. Like her mind is more creative and can find that shape in places other people wouldn't find it. So it would make those puzzles a freaking disaster. Like, dude, I've paired this up like 15 times already. Yeah. Like, what are you talking about? Where is it supposed to be?
That's so funny.
So that was interesting to me. I thought that was a good point on her part. My partner, who is also mentally ill, would point out others I'd missed, always to the same negative result.
Not always.
Were we making connections that simply didn't exist, or was this a deliberate act by the designers? That's too presumptuous on my part.
There's no way that it's deliberate, but at the same time, that is the experience of Senua in some way. It's no what would you call it? Coincidence that when you get near, or as you're walking around looking for that symbol, you just see a cloud of little particles that are that symbol all around you all the time. You're seeing hundreds of glowing symbols just all around you, right?
Yeah.
It's just there, right? And I think what the artist is trying to say in that moment is you're seeing this everywhere, but she needs to make sure it's a specific one to pass through. But you are seeing the shape everywhere. I don't know if that works in the story, but
Sure. If it's a deliberate attempt to mimic the pareidolik capabilities of someone with psychosis for a neurotypical audience, it's not communicated. Like with many of the other puzzles in Hellblade, it felt like I was being deliberately undermined, that my own mental illness was being explained to me by an inexperienced outsider. Having to embrace Senua's reality, as Ninja Theory's puzzles demand, meant having to give up on my lived experiences as a mentally ill person to occupy a perspective that felt inauthentic. Now, this is where, again, I think the answer to this question is the game wasn't designed to be played by people with mental illness.
no.
It was designed to be, which is why they tell you at the very beginning, if you have
Maybe don't play.
these symptoms,
Yeah.
maybe you shouldn't play it,
Yeah.
right? Here's a helpline and some more
Right.
information. This was made for neurotypical people to try to create some sense of empathy,
Empathy,
for
yeah.
those who experience these things,
Yeah.
to spread awareness about it.
See, empathy through art, which means empathy through metaphor.
Yes.
And not everyone's going to accept your metaphor, specifically people who have their own worldview that have built their own metaphor for it that may
Right.
be different from yours.
She felt it was inauthentic,
Exactly, yeah.
right? But she has that lived experience. I will never have that lived experience.
Yeah.
So this is the best way, the best metaphor that exists that I know of for me to get to
Yeah,
glean at
yeah.
all what it might feel like,
Yeah.
and to create any sense of empathy in my heart, to have some way to understand
Yeah.
a little bit of what they might be going through, right? I think that that's pretty clear. The game was not designed for those with mental illness
Yeah.
to find I don't know, a piece of art that like perfectly represents,
Yeah, that reflects them.
that reflects them.
Yeah.
It was meant for others to start to understand it, to destigmatize
Yeah.
these experiences, so that, by the end of the game, I'm sitting there just pouring into research about, wow, what is all this about?
Oh, sure.
And then
yeah,
I
yeah.
learn about the fact that that psychosis is conflated with psychopathy. It's like, oh, that's a mistake. This is not the same thing. And so if someone has these symptoms, it does not mean this.
But you
I
wouldn't
learned
have
all
known
of this
that.
because I played Hellblade.
Oh, there you go.
I wouldn't have had any reason to research this
Yeah.
had I not played this game. I learned more about your mental illness and have gained more empathy for your lived experience because I played Hellblade. So I would say the answer is I don't think it was designed for you. It was
No.
designed for me.
There you go. Exactly. I think that's true.
Did you going to say something?
I just have a few notes, but I don't know if they'll be more relevant to something she says later.
Oh, okay.
Or not. I don't know how much you're planning on reading.
I'm going to try to get through. I'm trying to see. Oh, this is a good one. The second zone I went to after defeating the fire god was the home of Valravan, a trickster deity whose area is a forested labyrinth of dead ends that aren't actually dead ends. The puzzles here involve getting to vantage points and realigning Senua's perception of the space to uncover the passageways that were there all along. I stopped and wondered about how many times in my own life my mental illness has aided me. No intrusive thought has ever saved me from harm or given me direction. Visual hallucinations have only been horrifying or mundane. Flashbacks have never offered profound insight. Perhaps my hypervigilance has kept me from danger. It's also made me lash out at perceived but unrealized threats. I'm not even disassociating through the process of writing this article. That would have at least removed me from the anxieties of writing. I'm certain my mental illness has never benefited me or society. Acclaimed Ninja Theory co-founder Tamim Antoniades muses on at the end of a documentary feature included in Hellblade. I'm not some mystical aberration helping the world progress. I'm just a girl trying to live as best I can. I feel like this might be the best point that she has.
Yeah.
So let me read that quote from Antoniadis, which comes at the end of the documentary.
What I have here is more or less a direct response to that specific point.
So what he says at the end of the documentary is, mental illness has been with us as long as we've been on this planet. But why? Why hasn't evolution stamped out this weakness from within our gene pool? I often pondered this question until I realized that it had an inbuilt flaw. It assumes that being and thinking differently is a weakness. The only reason we have computers, spacecraft, medicine, poetry, art, and yes, even video games is because in the visuals, we're able to simulate new abstract realities in our own minds and share them with the rest of us. We need people to be willing to see differently in order for us to progress and survive as a society, and we need to be open to these new ways of seeing. It is this spirit that motivated me to create Senua's story and share it with you. And this is kind of the Dillian quote, right? It's like, no, this is not a bad thing happening to you. It's actually a good thing. It's a beautiful thing that you see.
That's the rough part. But it has to be that way in a game, though. Games they have happy endings, right?
Yeah.
And America is obsessed, the West is obsessed with the be yourself trope. That's almost how every freaking movie nowadays ends is, oh, but if you just be yourself, everything will be fine. Always be yourself, right?
Yeah.
That's not the very good advice, first of all. Often it's like, no, you be better. Better yourself. That's what you should hear. That's not what people want to hear. People want to hear be yourself.
Yeah.
And so a game like this shows up and it's like, be yourself, but it's like trying to portray mental illness. And that's a difficult, place to like try to fit these pieces in and be like, we want the happy ending, which means you get over your illness. We also want the be yourself Hollywood trope, which means it's be okay with your mental illness, but both of those things are almost impossible, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, people have different experiences with different mental illness. Just because her mental illness has never helped anyone ever, as far as she knows. She may be wrong about that without knowing, but as far as she knows, it's never been a benefit to anybody ever. Does that mean that there's never been somebody
who
with
feels that way?
That type of psychosis that was able to help, right?
Yeah.
And in which case, we'll send you as that one, right?
Yeah.
Like I mentioned Carl Jung earlier.
Right.
In fact, this is J.R.R. Tolkien thought he was going schizophrenic too. In fact, he had a second person in his mind he would talk to. That is great stuff because him and Carl Jung around the same time both had similar experiences. And it's really cool, but they were, 1,000 miles apart. But J.R.R. Tolkien had a person in his mind who would only communicate in ancient dead languages and dressed in 17th century clothing, basically.
Yeah.
But it was a real person, and he would talk to this person, and he would go into this new world, the world of fairy, and his mind was able to see these things, and he crafted this incredible story based on what maybe was some type of, maybe a milder form of a schizophrenic type, multiple personality disorder type thing. It was a long time ago. He's been gone for a long time. I don't know that he was ever diagnosed, but I can think of a few instances where something approximating the types of things that they're hinting at within Senua's sacrifice have been beneficial to society through certain people who were 1 out of a million able to get through it and convey something to the rest of the world. But for the people who don't feel that way, I understand, but is it possible that somebody has been able to benefit the world through that? And is it worth it for Dillian to behave the way he does, to say, oh, be good, be true to yourself, and you see the world beautifully? Is it worth it to have a society that tells people who are mentally ill that if it's only 1 in a million, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the net harm would be too high, and that's something I'm willing to understand. I don't know. I guess you need an economist to determine whether the cost-benefit ratio is very good. But like in today's day and age, of course, we have medication for certain things, and so back in the day, they didn't. You basically had no choice but to tell somebody to be themselves. Otherwise, there was literally nothing else you could do. Right? It's either banishment, death, or let's live with you how you are.
Yeah.
Those are the only options in 800 AD picked culture.
Yeah, and this is what I would have assumed had I not read this quote from Antoniades.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't have assumed Dillian was speaking with the voice of the storyteller. You know, some sort
In
of
that
message.
moment. Yeah.
I would have just
like
assumed,
a didactic thematic.
I would have just assumed Dillian is speaking as an 8th century person who has no understanding of this and
More or
is
less
doing
what
their
I
best
thought. Yeah.
to help someone.
Yes, exactly.
That's what I would have taken Dillian's dialogue to be, until I read this, and it's like, maybe Antoniades is trying to speak through Dillian a little bit there and say, no, this is not necessarily a bad thing, this mental illness that you people are suffering through. It's actually beautiful that
All
we
of
think
you
differently.
People, everybody.
And we need to embrace that. Now, if I'm going to give Antoniades the benefit of the doubt on this, which I want to do, I don't know if I can, because I don't know him and I have no idea what his thought process was in this. But he said at the beginning of this process, he realized how completely ignorant he was of all of this.
Yes.
And this is what drove him to consult.
He still wanted to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
He wanted to consult with professionals, with people who had gone through it. He listened to them. There's so many quotes from them that I'm going to read here in a second that where they felt like they had been heard and validated.
Yeah.
So I wonder if he reached this conclusion
through talking to a lot of
based
people.
on if maybe that's the way some of the therapy was conveying these experiences to their patients.
I wonder.
Maybe this isn't, maybe that's part of the therapy that he was observing happening. Don't view this as this horrible thing that has never benefited you or anyone else.
Because you
View
still
it as
still
something-
have to live.
Yeah, view
You
it
still
as
have to live
something
in the world.
unique and beautiful
Yeah.
for your personal,
yourself.
unique life experience.
That's beautiful. Actually, what you just said there is probably better than whatever I said.
I wonder.
2 minutes ago.
I wonder if he heard the
it's for
therapists
you.
saying something like
Okay,
like that to them, and so he came to that conclusion based
Yeah.
on observing how these people talk about it.
Sure.
Not that he just decided he wanted to have this
Wouldn't it
message
be better
about.
if they were all...
That's me giving the benefit of the doubt to him. I don't know if that's true.
Well...
But given how hard he worked to try to understand this, and the obvious intent he had to be as accurate as he could and to try to validate these experiences, there's part of me that believes he wouldn't have just come to that conclusion on his own without hearing it from some of these people he was talking to, right? You were going to say something there, were you?
I do have other points to make in general, but not about that particular
I got
part.
a
I think
bunch
what
of
you said
quotes.
there is I like it.
Bunch of quotes here. The students who were involved in this project, so these are the people who were, who have the psychosis, they have the symptoms, right?
I see. Yeah.
The students who were involved in this project were incredibly excited about being involved. They have described the experience as being important because it values their lived experiences and shows that despite what they have been through, all that experience becomes valid and it's something we should all be talking about. That's from Tracy Bartlett, who's Recovery College East. So Recovery College is the name of this place where these people are having therapy. So that's why they refer to them as students. It's a college.
I see.
So it's Recovery College East.
Okay.
So Tracy Bartlett is someone who works there, right? I was urged by one fellow that we should not shy away from showing his horror. And so I was perpetually torn in making Hellblade. This is Antoniades speaking. Had we gone too far with our representations or not far enough? So the whole time he was concerned about that, right?
Second guessing, yeah.
People with lived experience were keen to emphasize another point, that it is wrong to define a person by their symptoms. Quite often the illness comes not from the symptoms, but from the stigma, isolation, and mistreatment that comes from the rest of society.
Yeah.
I feel like that's kind of the point there.
Well, in the Polygon article you were reading, she actually does mention that.
Yeah.
At the towards the end, she's saying something like, well, this game doesn't, and of course, I don't think she expected an 800 AD game to address this stuff, but she says the game doesn't address what it's like to be stared at in a mall. The game doesn't address what it's like to be to have like cops break down your door because you didn't answer your phone for a week,
Yeah.
and then everyone thinks you're dead, but you just were depressed for a week or whatever. Like she's saying, the game doesn't explain the social aspect of dealing with other people
Yes.
while being sick.
Which is the stigma
Yes, exactly.
that he's talking about.
I think they're kind of would find some similarities.
It's like the game itself, the part you're playing, is after Senua has lived through all of that stuff.
Exactly.
So you see that
This
in
is
flashback.
after that, yeah.
You see this in flashback. You
Yeah.
don't actually engage with that part of it
Yeah.
because, I don't know, it wouldn't work for the story to do that. The story is not a simulator, like a life simulator.
No.
It's a...
We're all in her head the whole time.
Yeah.
There's so much value to that, I think, especially with the archetypes and the things that we're able to see within her psyche and the symbolism there, but it's just her.
Yeah. Okay. Towards the end of the project, service users and professionals that had collaborated with us were invited to see the near final game. It was a chance to see if the game had reflected their views or if it had misrepresented them.
Okay.
So all the way up to the end, they were concerned about whether they had misrepresented these people's lived experience. For me, this is from Jenny Essen, who is one of the students from the college, right? For me, being involved in especially developing Senua's character had been really important, and being able to bring in my perspective and what I see and what I hear. Having that built into the game has been a real privilege. It's gritty and it's meaty, and there are some tough subjects in there that are being tackled with honesty. This is from Kathy Jones. I was blown away by it today, absolutely blown away. It was fantastic to get the opportunity to use our lived experience in a very creative way. There's nothing tokenistic about the work we've put in. It feels like we've been listened to. Things have been taken on board, and I think there's a lot of realism in the game itself, and it feels very authentic. So you have this person who lives with these symptoms saying it's very authentic, and this other person saying it's totally inauthentic, right? This is from
And
Michael.
That just goes to show that maybe we're classifying different illnesses under the same umbrella, where it's like, no, they have different things.
There's so
but we just call it the
many
same thing because we don't
things.
know
Yes,
enough.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah, so they're like, that's not me, but yeah.
This comes from Michael LaFond. Hellblade will give people a good experience of what it's like to hear voices and have those experiences. I'm glad that the guys at Ninja Theory have asked us to come along and help them build an experience that's positive. When it comes out, I'll get a copy myself and have a go. This is from Tracy Bartlett again, the person who works at the college. I think all the way through I was really inspired by how the conversations have translated into the game in a way that I think I didn't imagine was possible. So wonderful, really wonderful. And then Charles Fernio, who was one of the experts on voice hearing who consulted on the game. I really hope others will follow the lead they've set and use the power of something like a video game to change people's perceptions, to increase understanding, and ultimately to make some of the stigma around voice hearing and other experiences go away.
That's important to what I wrote here.
Yeah. And then Paul Fletcher. I'm very excited by this way of trying to represent mental illness because I think it actually might be offering us insights that we wouldn't get from pure scientific explorations and actually giving us quite an empathetic view of what it might be like. So those are some of the things. Now she saw the documentary, so she would have seen, what those people said.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I just want to be fair to her in saying
She's aware
obviously aware that
some people
they gave those testimonies and
yeah.
that they had a good experience about it or that they felt validated by it. But I just want to bring that up as another side of the coin, right? And I think what you just said was really important too. Like, there's probably a wide net or umbrella here of different conditions really kind of being labeled under one term, psychosis.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's probably so many different lived experiences within that. And so maybe it's too broad a thing to really classify,
And just the nature of it too. I mean, some people will hear voices, some people will see hallucinations, some people will feel things. I mean, it's not always going to be the same for everybody.
Yeah, but this point that she made in the article, flashbacks have never offered profound insight. You know, visual hallucinations have only been horrifying or mundane. That's her experience.
Yeah.
Other people might not have that experience where it's only this.
Yeah.
Right?
What I couldn't help but wonder as I read her thoughts on this is that how would a video game accurately address her, specifically her condition?
Yeah.
Where it sucks, there's nothing good about it, and it doesn't benefit anyone, herself or society.
Yeah.
And then that's the end of the game. Like, it's boom, done.
Yeah.
Now go.
I'm certain.
Play Mario.
I'm certain my mental illness has never benefited me or society.
Yeah, and I don't know what to say to somebody who's in that place mentally.
Yeah.
That's rough, and there really isn't much you can do about it. I can sit there and be like, well, you know, go conquer the world.
That's exactly what she's upset that Dillian was doing.
Exactly.
Validate her experience. Say, you know, I'm sorry that that's something you have to deal with. That is, you know, a difficult life experience to live. But validate that that's what it is, instead of trying to recontextualize it for that person.
Sure. How would that have worked in the game? I mean, you could have just had a scene of him, but it wouldn't contribute to the theme of the game at all. But it would maybe appease a few people if you put a scene in where he goes, "Yeah, it's hard," and then that was the end of the scene. Like, you
I'm
need
here for you.
to offer the
I'm
hope.
here to support you.
Yeah.
Your experience is what it is. I'm not going to try to preach at you or recontextualize for you what your lived experience means.
You would have to take out all of his other scenes.
Twist it into a positive somehow.
Yeah.
If what you're telling me, I believe what you're telling me about it. I will accept your version of what you're telling me it is.
Yeah.
And I will support you.
And if you say you need to go live alone in the woods because the plague's your fault, go.
Right.
But I don't know that that's right. But at the same time, I don't know this. I don't know this subject, and most people don't. It's very difficult to know how to respond. I wouldn't have agreed and said, yeah, you have to go live in the woods and leave because you're too difficult.
Yeah.
But maybe somebody like this woman may have wanted validation that she does need to leave and go live alone in the woods, as opposed to, I don't know. I just, when you're telling a story, but you're not injecting any form of hope or any form of a possible, like the big deal within Christian, Western storytelling is the resurrection at the end. There's always a renewal of life at the end of a story. That's how it's been even pre-Christian, right? That's just a thing. That's been a thing for tons and many, many, many thousands of years. But also, you will likely never live a normal life if you have one of these conditions. Yeah, that's rough. Anyways, we don't have to solve it here. I'm just saying.
She goes on to say, Senua's journey is a typical hero's quest. According to the aforementioned documentary, Hellblade was originally conceived as a straightforward, heroic adventure game in a world made from illusions. A young warrior is thrust into a reality she doesn't understand and accepts the call to action. She ventures into the underworld, accompanied by a sage and other helpers, and reconciles with her father by killing him. Embracing her new fate and self, she's ready to return to the material world. This takes place all in the span of an afternoon. Even as allegory, this isn't how mental illness works. Thrusting real mental illness symptomology into a game that didn't begin with it in mind feels tacky. I think that there's a point there.
No, of course. Everything she's saying has a point.
Yeah.
It all has a point. So
playing through Hellblade was torturous. I'd managed parts of chapters before having to abandon it, is what you were saying, to walk around the block.
Yeah.
Many reviewers, while praising the game, have used words like tense and stressful to describe it. For me, a game like Dark Souls is tense and stressful. Hellblade is something different entirely. I screamed and shouted. I went through a series of symptoms: disassociation, derealization, panic attacks, acute hypervigilance, unshakable feelings of dread. I even long threaded on Twitter a lot. I nearly quit the game every other chapter. I watched as the black rot crept up Senua's arm and as I died repeatedly, getting hung up on bad geometry. All of which brings me to what was initially the most controversial aspect of this game for many reviewers, death, or rather permadeath. I don't think I would need to read this part so much, but...
Although her experience there sounds like the game was done extremely well if she had those experiences while playing it, right?
Yeah.
Because she's somebody who deals with these types of things, and while playing the game, it was eliciting those types of reactions out of her. I would assume that that means that she was dealing with something that had some significance to her deeper than for most people.
Yeah.
Because I didn't do any of that when I played.
She says, many people with mental illness struggle with feelings of dying, fearing that their next bad experience will end them, even launching into suicidal ideation and actions.
Right.
In Hellblade, this is a bad metaphor handled poorly. The whole idea of if you die too much or fail too much, the rot will permadeath you. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to skip through this. In some ways, I feel Ninja Theory attempting to construct a sensitive lesson plan on a neurotypical audience about what mental illness is difficult. A less cynical version of me wants to applaud the development team for trying to make a compelling didactic game. Their depiction of the auditory and visual aspects of mental illness are solid in many ways, even if impressionistic. Hellblade comes close to showing how trauma can impact and incite episodes of severe mental illness.
Oh, there you go.
Still, in my most genial of moods, I can't help but feel like this hurts more than it could possibly help.
It hurts.
Mental illness doesn't exist in a vacuum. A person's mental illness is
what I was thinking.
inextricable from their social context.
Yeah, the people around.
While the developers understand that mental illness is interpreted differently based on social context, they fail to illustrate those experiences within society. The closest we get to seeing Senua exist with other people is in flashbacks to conversations with Dillian or the trauma of her father's extensive abuse. She never has to go to the store for milk. She's not struggling with losing her job because she had a flashback in a meeting. Paramedics and cops never break down her door because she didn't answer the phone. You said all of this before. Yeah. We never go with Senua to the Social Security Administration offices as she's denied support because they've deemed her not disabled enough. Senua's village is wiped out or before our quest begins. The ending reveals she never goes anywhere. So, I guess the aspects that she thinks are important to raise awareness about are the social aspects. It's the living among people part of it, and the stigma. And it's like, that is there, but it's only there talked about in the past in the game. It's only represented through flashback, but not even like, she doesn't even interact with the villagers in flashback. She only talks with Dillian, who they're having a conversation about the villagers or something like that.
Part of that's the low budget nature of the game.
Yes. It's like if you wanted to make a simulation style game where a person deals with these things day to day, I mean, that would be one thing.
It wouldn't sell very well, in which case you'd be left with the question, how much awareness did your game spread versus Senua's Sacrifice?
Sure.
If you made a simulation game that was more accurate, that nobody played.
Yeah. Oh, this part. It's because of this lack of social context that Hellblade communicates, perhaps unintentionally, the harmful idea that mental illness is all in her head. It presumes a world where people with mental illness exist wholly divorced from their societies. I don't think it does, though. I don't think it does.
It doesn't. It just doesn't show it. It tells us. But
it tells us instead of showing us. That's true. But also, I don't think the game is trying to say this was all in her head. I don't think that's ever the message.
It's actually impossible to tell what was real and what wasn't.
Yeah.
I'm assuming she really did go down the river, right?
Yeah.
Like she went somewhere.
Yeah.
She went to a place. I don't know what was real and what wasn't.
Right. And maybe that's the part that she's wanting to know. She wants to know which parts of Hellblade were the real parts and which ones were not.
Otherwise, she assumes it was all in her head.
Right.
Every single part.
But I don't think the game is trying to say that whole journey was just all in your head. That's not the point Hellblade's trying to make. At all. The story is centered, like I've been saying, on trauma and grief and then acceptance. And what would it's like a hypothetical sort of thing. We all go through stages of denial when we have trauma. What would a person who sees things that aren't really there, having a psychotic episode,
Yes.
what would their brain, which is hyper creative, come
Yes.
up with to deny the reality
Right.
that Dillian is dead?
Right.
It's a hypothetical
how
situation,
would they
a
go through
metaphor
the
or
journey?
allegory for grief and acceptance, or
Yeah.
denial and acceptance. That's what the story is really about. But it's viewing that through the lens of what would a person who has these symptoms, who's having a pretty severe psychotic episode, how would they deny the reality? What ways would that manifest in that culture from that century
Oh, yeah.
with that social context
mythologies, yeah.
and what they believed about magic and curses and
Right.
things like that? I think all of that is not out of bounds, personally, because I don't think that this is what it's trying to say, that it's all in your head. I don't think it's communicating that harmful idea in any way at all. Anyways,
I don't really know what else to add to that.
people with mental illness have to live among other people. That's a colossal part of what makes living with mental illness a struggle. To remove that context for narrative and gameplay reasons undercuts any desire from the developers to be sensitive or didactic. Just not sure I agree with that. Okay, I'm going to kind of skip through the rest of this and go to some of the comments.
Oh.
Because there's a couple comments from people who have these symptoms, and they make some interesting points. It's this guy, or maybe girl, Raspberry Jam. There are a couple of interesting points raised in this critique that are worth further discussion. One is how to depict symptoms of mental illness and the other related conditions from a first-person perspective so that neurotypical people can understand it while keeping it a completely accurate depiction. The problem is that it's very hard to communicate what symptoms are like without some form of exaggeration and allegory. Take, for example, this depiction of what sensory overload for autistic people is like. There's a YouTube video here where it's supposed to kind of show you what
Yeah, I've
it's
seen
like,
it.
right?
Yeah.
So they say here, anyone who's autistic will tell you that this depiction is over the top. But if it wasn't, and instead perfectly reflected the reality of the experience through an autistic lens, then it would be a video of someone walking into a mall. It may overwhelm autistic people, but neurotypical people will just see a video of someone walking through a mall. This video will also not reflect anyone's experience with autism, as it can manifest itself in such a vast variety of ways.
Once again, the umbrella is
Yeah,
too wide. Yeah.
for that to be impossible, but that is a separate problem. I understand that anyone with a very strong sense of pareidolia will find those rune puzzles to be absolutely dreadful, given that they may see instances of the rune that are not intended. But how could you depict pareidolia in such a way that neurotypical people will engage with it, and for it to be clear that this is what is being depicted without any exaggeration or allegory? To put it in another way, I'm autistic, which means that my experience when playing games will automatically be through my autistic lens. If I were to play a game such as Stardew Valley or something with custom characters, then the way that I interact with that game will be reflective of my condition. I may spend all my time farming and avoid socializing as much as possible simply because I'm predisposed to doing this. This means that the character is, in a sense, autistic because it is the result of the input of an autistic person. So if a game were to attempt to replicate symptoms of autism, then that would be a somewhat bizarre experience for me, as these attempts to depict these symptoms will be experienced through a lens that already experiences these symptoms, magnifying it to a level where it feels unrealistic and maybe a bit tacky. But an attempt to convey what having autism is like that perfectly reflects our experiences will likely be too subtle for neurotypical people to build any real sense of understanding.
So you either have to make it for neurotypical people or
Yes.
for neuroatypical people.
Yes.
There isn't an easy middle ground for both
No.
that will satisfy both.
No, and that's kind
Fair
of
enough. Yeah.
the
I agree with
conclusion that I've come to after
think so.
reading through all of this stuff.
Yeah. I agree
Is
with that.
I don't believe this game was made for the mentally ill to see their experiences validated and accurately depicted.
Yeah.
It was meant to be almost like a conversation starter, not even like necessarily some sort of in-depth, high-level college course to where like people will come out of this having this like great, deep understanding of it. It's more like, here's a conversation starter, a starting point, a point for you to begin and then go look for more yourself, which is exactly what I did.
Which is exactly, yeah.
I didn't learn everything that I now know about psychosis from playing Hellblade.
Game. Yeah, and nor should anybody have expected that would ever be the case with anybody.
I learned it after gaining empathy for this fictional character Senua's experience, which might have been exaggerated, as Raspberry Jam is saying here, in order for me to see past the subtlety and the nuance and actually see that, like he's saying. And that got me, that sense of empathy, got me to look more into it and realize there are people dealing with this. And it increased my awareness and my empathy. And I researched it for a long time after playing the game. I researched it for weeks after that. I already have an interest in psychology, kind of a passion for it already. But this was just like a spark, a conversation starter, like I'm saying, something that just got my brain going. And going, okay, I need to know more about this now.
I think that's what it was trying to be.
Yes.
So to judge it for what it was trying to be, I think
it was successful.
It succeeded in that regard.
Yes.
My wife knows a lot of people who have various mental illnesses. She's worked in the past in different companies that provide assistance for people.
Yeah.
So she knew somebody who, they're very symbolic often, right? She knew somebody who was very autistic but may have had other things going on as well. But he could only ever take 2 steps forward and 1 step back everywhere he went, because he felt like that was symbolic of how his life had gone, right? And he'd hold his hands out and he'd walk 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Everywhere he goes, that's how he walks. That's how he maneuvers in the world. But he also likes to play video games. And when he would play a game like Kingdom Hearts, in the game, he's doing that. His character, Sora, will take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So to the credit of Raspberry Jam saying that I just play Stardew Valley the way, and my autism is reflected in the game based on just how I play it, that's exactly the experience that this guy had. Like, his autism was already, by virtue of the fact that he has autism, he played the game in the manner of how he experiences the world anyways. The game didn't need to be made specially for him. In fact, if a game was made for him, he would have hated it. Because what if it was 3 steps forward and 1 step back, and the game forced you to do that, saying, see, this is what it's like to have autism. And then he's like, I have autism, and I want to take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. This game's wrong, and it would actually be very restricting for him. So it's like, you really can't have it both ways. I think it's, maybe you can, but I don't think we've figured that out yet.
Yeah. You had some notes.
I do. I have 2 big notes here for this. So the first one I'll read here is that this is a product of art, right? So unfortunately, as a product of art, art is contained. It has boundaries. It has a frame or a runtime. Hellblade ends. It comes to an end, unlike most people's psychoses. And it ends happily. And most stories worth telling do, right? Maybe a video game isn't the right place to experience this type of theme, but it certainly comes a lot closer to any other medium I've ever experienced it in, be it film, TV, books, plays, or pictures, or paintings, anything like that.
That's so what a video game mentioned. This is in 100 years of cinema, like barely now, been touched.
You can feel it, and that's fine. But this is where it comes to my next point here, and this is a quote from Dr. Ian McGilchrist, who I've mentioned several times. He wrote *The Master and His Emissary*. He's great, but he deals with things that are a bit outside of his ability to grasp, and he's one of the smartest people in the world. And so, but he's constantly trying to go towards that edge of metaphysics and the things that are difficult that most people who want to maintain their reputation don't bother touching, because of this quote that he says here. So Ian McGilchrist is speaking on the sacred for this quote, but I think the line fits so perfectly into the controversy with this game and why this game ultimately maintains its value and worth. It easily applies to the mysteries of mental illness as well. So he says, the subject, now he's talking about the sacred, but I'm going to reinterpret his quote as if he's talking about mental illness, because it fits. So I'm putting in mental illness, now this is Ian McGilchrist. That subject is profoundly important and yet almost impossible to speak about. And that in speaking about it, you inevitably betray it because it's hard to convey in words, right?
Yeah.
But in not speaking about it, you also betray it because you pretend it doesn't exist and it's not important.
That's really good.
So I, of course, failed, as one must do in this attempt, but I am proud to have tried and failed, and I hope that my attempt and my failure will encourage some people. I'd like to add, and then this is back to me talking, I'd like to add that maybe eventually someone will get it right because of all the attempts previously made by those who got it wrong. So, to the critics, criticize away.
Yeah.
Please do.
Yes.
It's how artists will know how close their metaphor came to the issue they were trying to address, right? Criticism's valid and important. It is. But don't do anything that might make artists feel like this is a subject they cannot approach.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest issue. I feel for the writer, the Polygon writer here. I can't remember her name, but I feel for her. But I would also add that the possibility that maybe an overly critical article can possibly do more harm than good. The way that she accuses the game of doing more harm than good. That by lambasting a successful game, the first of its kind to even attempt this, it's possible you are going to push other people who would have maybe done it better away from even trying, because there's you're going to get it, as Ian McGilchrist says, you're going to get it wrong. You have to accept that from the beginning. If you're dealing with something difficult like this, you're going to get it wrong. But be courageous and do it anyways. And sometimes it's better that people are talking at all, because at some point somebody will be able to break through in a way that nobody else could. But it's only because people felt free and were allowed to speak on the topic in the first place.
Right. I agree with that.
That's all my notes. We hit every note I took for the whole game.
I think that, we've gone about as far as we can.
Yeah.
as neurotypical people.
I know.
As someone who hasn't had that lived experience. We've gone about as far as we can.
We probably have said too much.
Yeah, that's probably true.
And of course, as usual, we mean no offense, and we are always open to criticism and conversation. I
would love if any of our viewers struggle with mental illness, and particularly if they have any of the symptoms of psychosis, to comment on their perspective on this whole thing, right? Yeah. We've said our piece. We've kind of, made the points or gotten across like how we feel about it. But I'm definitely open to hearing more perspectives on this, because, like you're saying, the more perspective we get on it, the closer we get to being right, to getting it right when we talk about it.
Eventually, yeah.
Yeah, and I want to get it right.
It's like we're whittling away. You got to whittle before it just takes a long time, and there's a lot of garbage you got to get through first.
Always a really important thing to me to get it right, so to speak, right?
And it may not be done in our lifetime.
It may not.
But regardless, I think this game will be seen as a tremendous step towards that. Whenever somebody does get it right, they'll probably say, yeah, Senua's Sacrifice was one of my influences.
Yeah. And the fact that it was, a topic that has almost never been broached at all.
I know, like at all.
No one has really given this the kind of attempt, like honest attempt that this game has given this topic. And it is taboo, and it is a heavily stigmatized thing. And I think that they have succeeded in destigmatizing it a little bit.
A little bit. Yeah, but hey, That's a big deal.
At
A
least
little bit's a big deal.
helping me understand the difference between psychosis and psychopathy,
Yeah.
and you know, seeing the testimonies of some people and seeing, you know, that the real harm, even like she was saying in the article, is how do you live with people, among people, while having this without suffering their prejudice, right?
Well, that's the next. That's the next step
That's
for
the
the
next
next
step.
game developer, and then they'll get it wrong too, and then somebody else will take the next step.
Right. Anyways, we hope that you've enjoyed this breakdown of Hellblade: Senua Sacrifice. Hope that you've enjoyed the game, despite how dark and heavy and depressing and difficult
It's a good game.
it can be.
It is a good game.
I really, really love it. I really, really love it. So,
Get ready for Vagrant Story.
Vagrant Story's next. Get ready for it, people. Look for the pinned comment to know where to play up to. Peace out.